Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're digging through the massive horror movie villains Iceberg. I stumbled upon this one straight from icebergcharts.com and thought it looked like a lot of fun. There's been several horror movie icebergs floating around, but I've never seen one that focused specifically on horror movie villains, which I think is a fun angle. It's also one of the biggest icebergs I've ever covered, with 7 tiers and well over 200 entries. Starting at the top with some of the most iconic villains in horror history and working our way down to some more unique and lesser known villains at the bottom. Every tier introduced me to at least one, if not several, really cool movies and villains that I'd never heard of, so I'm hoping you find it just as interesting and informative as I did. This was a ton of work to put together, and like I said, one of the biggest I've ever done, so if you appreciate my content, consider joining my Patreon, the link is below. But that's enough blabbering out of me, let's get into the video. This is the complete horror movie villains Iceberg explained. Okay, so let's get right into tier 1, starting with Jason Voorhees, Friday the 13th. I believe Jason Voorhees is probably the most iconic horror villain, maybe of all time, but certainly of the 80s and 90s. Even if you haven't seen a Friday the 13th movie, you know that classic hockey mask, which will forever be a mainstay at every Halloween shop. It's interesting to note that it's not actually until the 3rd movie in the franchise that Jason adorns the iconic mask. In the 2nd movie, he had a sack on his head, inspired by the 76 horror film The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and of course, Jason isn't really in the 1st movie, at least not the version of the character we know and love. If you don't know Jason's backstory, he was essentially a severely deformed child who was bullied mercilessly. During summer camp at Camp Crystal Lake, while being teased, he was pushed into a lake. Jason couldn't swim, of course, and began drowning, but there were no counselors around because they were busy partying, and so Jason died. Or so everyone thought. Somehow Jason survived and lived in the woods for years, growing into a large, menacing man out for the blood of Camp Crystal Lake counselors. That's kind of the gist of it. The series retcons some things and seems to constantly change Jason's characteristics. Eventually, he's basically an immortal zombie and even goes to hell and back in one of the sequels. Michael Myers, Halloween. Michael Myers is definitely up there with Jason Voorhees as one of the most recognizable villains. While only a 6-year-old boy, Michael murdered his sister on Halloween and is sent to a mental institution. 15 years later, he escapes the facility and returns to his hometown to continue killing. Like Jason, Michael Myers seems to develop near supernatural strength and endurance as the series goes on. Another similarity is that Michael never talks and is always silent. He's often called the embodiment of evil and is simply referred to as the Shape in the original credits. Freddy Krueger, A Nightmare on Elm Street. The last of the big 3, Freddy Krueger is very different from Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. He's not a hulking, slow-moving silent killer, but instead a wisecracking creep with a big personality. His striped sweater and hat are iconic, and not to mention his burned skin and of course the metal-clawed glove. Like any of these long-running franchises, there has been several changes to the origin of Freddy over the years, but the basic overview is that Freddy was a child killer. He kidnapped several children and took them back to his boiler room. He was actually arrested but got off on his crimes due to a technicality. The parents of Elm Street, where Freddy kidnapped most of his victims, decided to take matters into their own hands, burning down Freddy's hideout with him still inside. Years later, Freddy returns, not in physical form but in the dreams of the teenagers of Elm Street seeking revenge. Later on in the series, they explain that Freddy is the bastard son of 100 maniacs, when his mother, a nun, was accidentally trapped in an insane asylum with the inmates. A truly disturbing scenario and fitting for such a rotten villain. I've always loved Freddy because of the supernatural part of his powers. Someone who can invade your dreams and kill you is terrifying because everyone's got to sleep sometime. Plus, because most of the deaths take place in the dream world, it allows for some really crazy concepts and effects, usually involving strange transformations of Freddy. Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Leatherface originally appeared in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but became such a popular character that he eventually became the focus of most of the films in the franchise. Originally, he's introduced as part of the Sawyer family, who lost their jobs at a rural slaughterhouse and became cannibals. Here, Leatherface is a bit of an enigma. His family is insane, but they at least can communicate. Leatherface, on the other hand, seems to be mentally impaired, and he wears masks made of human skin from his victims. In the original movie, he also adorns various outfits and different skin masks to suit the situation, like one where he dresses like an old woman with an apron, and the most iconic, a suit and a mask with makeup. There have been a couple of different origin stories to Leatherface. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning, he's born in a slaughterhouse and has a rare skin disease, so he's thrown in a dumpster and found by the Hewitt family, even though the family in the original original were called the Sawyers. So Leatherface would wear the mask as a way of hiding his deformities. I personally like the mystique of the original Leatherface because they didn't try to make him really cool or menacing. He was kind of quirky, which I think is part of what was so scary. Chucky, Child's Play. Maybe my favorite of this era of horror villains, Chucky's real name is Charles Lee Ray, a serial killer who uses voodoo to transfer his soul into a good guy doll to escape death after being shot by a cop. Now Chucky is on the hunt for a new body to transfer his soul into, or else be stuck in the doll's body forever. What really makes Chucky shine is the voice acting of Brad Dourif. He's got the perfect voice that can be both terrifying and hilarious.
You stupid you filthy
While killer dolls aren't exactly an original concept, the personality of Chucky is why he's the king. As the series went on, they took a more dark comedy turn, no longer trying to be scary, but still filled with blood and gore. My favorites are probably the bride and seed of Chucky. Chucky trying to navigate a completely dysfunctional relationship and try to be a father as a doll is great, and I think Chucky has his best look here with his face stapled back together. Plus, this is when they went full over the top dark comedy with everything from a John Waters cameo to doll sex scenes. Pinhead, Hellraiser. Like Leatherface, Pinhead was originally part of a group of villains in the original Hellraiser movie, but he had such a great look that he became the central reoccurring villain through the franchise. Pinhead is a Cenobite, a demonic entity from another dimension, easily recognizable by his pale, mutilated face adorned with an intricate grid of scars and nails hammered into his skull at each intersection. Before becoming Pinhead, he was Elliot Spencer, a British military officer who became disillusioned with humanity and sought out the lament configuration to transcend ordinary experiences. Eventually, he became the leader of the Cenobites and is responsible for inflicting extreme forms of sadomasochistic torture on those who summon him. What's interesting about Pinhead is he's not inherently evil, he just abides by a twisted moral code centered around pain and pleasure. Although as the series progresses, he does become much more openly antagonistic. He also stands out as being fairly calm and well-spoken. He often speaks in a measured, almost poetic way, delivering lines that emphasize the existential horror of his victims' fates.
The eternal refrain of humanity, pleading ignorance, begging for mercy. Please help me. I don't understand.
Count Dracula. There's been many iterations of Dracula over the years, most notably Bela Lugosi's portrayal in the original Universal film. Although my favorite portrayal is probably Christopher Lee's version in the Hammer movies. Probably just because the gloves are off here and there was much more blood and gore in these films. There's really no use going too deep on this one because he's such a well-known character and the heart of all vampire fiction. Frankenstein's monster. On par with Dracula is Frankenstein's monster. We all know the drill here. Dr. Victor Frankenstein finds a way to reanimate the dead. He goes grave robbing and builds a man out of various human body parts and brings the corpse back to life using the power of lightning. This story has probably had more iterations and parodies than even Dracula. My favorite being Young Frankenstein, which is my favorite Frankenstein movie. It, or Pennywise the Clown. This one can go really deep because it is actually a cosmic entity that has a wild backstory. Luckily, I just read the book recently, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. Unfortunately, so is that one scene. Yeah, let's not talk about that chapter. Well, as I said, it is a cosmic entity that comes to Earth living beneath the town of Derry and feasting on its residents. Mostly kids because their fear is simple and pure, whereas the fear of adults is too complicated. It can take the shape of anything the human mind can imagine, but typically in the form of what they fear most. One very common form it takes is Pennywise the Dancing Clown, and this is the most recognizable entity in the It films. Originally portrayed by Tim Curry in the 90s movie, and more recently by Bill Skarsgård, both portrayals are pretty scary in their own way. The original 1990 film was actually a two-part TV miniseries, and a lot of kids were traumatized by accidentally seeing this at a young age. And this seems to have been a big factor in the increase of people being afraid of clowns. Hannibal Lecter, The Silence of the Lambs. Made iconic by the film Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter is a hyper-intelligent serial killer, known for being extremely polite and possessing exquisite manners despite being a serial murderer and cannibal. He has a pretty tragic backstory. He was born in Lithuania to a wealthy aristocratic family. However, during World War II, his family was killed and he and his sister Misha were captured by looters. These looters ultimately resorted to cannibalism, killing and eating Misha and forcing Hannibal to eat her as well, which would explain why he turned out to be such a psychopath. The TV show Hannibal showcases more of these details and more of Hannibal's brutal murders, but the film Silence of the Lambs features him in his much more recognizable look, played by Anthony Hopkins, adorning the straitjacket and human muzzle. Ghostface, Scream. Ghostface is another one of those villains that has become synonymous with Halloween, as the classic Ghostface mask continues to show up every Halloween. What's interesting about this villain is that it's actually not a single person, as multiple people have worn the mask to commit murders throughout the series. Despite Ghostface being worn by many antagonists, there is some similar characteristics, which are the classic knife as a weapon and the use of threatening phone calls. Originally, the killer would call the victim and ask horror movie trivia on the phone to taunt them.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer.
The concept was mocked in Scary Movie, and because of this, people often associate the Ghostface mask with that franchise as well, mostly due to this classic scene.
Yo.
What's up?
Jack Torrance, The Shining. Jack Torrance is the main antagonist in Kubrick's The Shining. Well, in reality, the main antagonist is the Overlook Hotel itself, and Jack is just used as a tool. Jack is a writer and alcoholic who becomes the caretaker at the Overlook Hotel in Colorado. Because of the severity of the weather, the hotel is closed through the winter with only the caretaker left to watch over the place. So Jack, his wife, and his son move into the hotel. However, there's a strange presence within the hotel that slowly drives Jack insane, convincing him to try and kill his wife and child. Obviously, Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance is unforgettable as he becomes truly terrifying, leading to one of the most notable scenes in horror cinema. Sadako Yamamura, The Ring. Sadako is the main antagonist of the Ring movies. There are several different versions of her origin depending on what movie, but the basic gist is that she was a young girl with psychic powers who was eventually murdered by being thrown down a well. She comes back as a vengeful spirit. One of Sadako's psychic abilities is called ninja or thoughtography, where she can project images onto physical surfaces. Using her ninja ability, Sadako projected her anger, pain, and images related to her tragic death onto a videotape and cursed it. So anyone who watched the tape would be cursed to die after 7 days. Sadako is just as iconic as many of the American horror villains on here. Her long black hair covering her face is synonymous with J-horror, and the freaky way she crawls out of the TV to pursue her victim is a great moment in horror history. Xenomorphs, Alien. The Xenomorphs are the central threat in the Alien franchise and are forever embedded in pop culture. Xenomorphs were originally created by an advanced race of beings known as the Engineers as a form of bioweapon. Basically, you could unleash the Xenomorphs on a planet and it would eventually annihilate the inhabitants. This backstory with the Engineers is pretty complex, and since the focus here is on a specific villain, I'll mostly look at the Xenomorph as it's portrayed in the original Alien movie. The Xenomorph life cycle works like this. A queen Xenomorph first lays eggs. These eggs contain what are known as facehuggers that implant their victim with an embryo. Eventually, this embryo rapidly grows and bursts through the host's chest, giving them the nickname chest burster. This creature then rapidly grows into a full-grown xenomorph, adopting some of the characteristics of its host, which is explored in the later films as the xenomorphs take different forms depending on what creature they used. But in Alien, the xenomorph looks somewhat humanoid with an elongated head and tail. The original design for xenomorphs were actually by H.R. Geiger, a surrealist artist that blended human physique with machines. These creatures are experts at stealth and have acidic blood. Plus, you can't forget about the weird mouth within a mouth that's so freaky. Bruce, Jaws. While the shark in Jaws was never given an actual name in either film or novel, the name Bruce originates from the name given to the original animatronics by Steven Spielberg himself. Although, let's be honest, most people just call the shark Jaws. Well, either way, the shark is 25 feet long, weighs 4.9 tons, and killed 5 people before being blown to bits by an exploding scuba tank. Candyman. Originating from Clive Barker's short story The Forbidden, Candyman was once a talented African-American artist in the late 19th century who was brutally murdered by a lynch mob for his relationship with a white woman. His hand was severed, he was smeared with honey, and stung to death by bees. Now, in urban legend, Candyman can be summoned by saying his name 5 times in front of a mirror, at which point he appears with a hook for a hand and exacts bloody revenge on those who call him. The thing I think of most about this movie is how it revitalized the Bloody Mary game, only with Candyman instead. And I remember it being a common thing at sleepovers to dare your friends to say Candyman 5 times in the mirror with the lights off. The Predator. The Predator comes from an alien species which travels the galaxy seeking the most formidable prey to hunt for sport and honor. The creature is equipped with advanced weaponry, including cloaking devices, plasma casters, and wrist blades, while sporting dreadlock-like appendages, mandibles, and thermal vision. Predators hunt humans and other species they deem worthy opponents, following a code of honor that respects strength and combat prowess. Their presence is marked by their iconic growl and the use of trophies, often collecting skulls and spines as symbols of their victories. I always like the concept of the Predators because they're an actual real intelligent life form rather than some wild beast. Annabelle the Doll, The Conjuring. Annabelle is a cursed doll, originally appearing briefly in The Conjuring, but later getting her own film. The doll is based on a real-life Raggedy Ann doll, but depicted as a more sinister porcelain doll in the films. Unlike Chucky, Annabelle is actually just a conduit for a demonic entity, rather than the doll itself being possessed. It's revealed in the prequel movie, Annabelle Creation, that Annabelle Mullins, a young girl, died in a tragic accident, and her grieving parents unknowingly allowed a malevolent spirit to inhabit the doll. The demon uses the doll to manipulate and terrorize those around it, often causing supernatural disturbances and violent incidents. The Warrens, paranormal investigators, and main characters of the Conjuring franchise, eventually take custody of Annabelle and place her in their occult museum to contain her evil influence. Jigsaw. Saw. Jigsaw, also known as John Kramer, is the primary antagonist in the Saw movies. Originally a civil engineer diagnosed with terminal cancer, Kramer becomes the Jigsaw Killer, though he never directly murders his victim. Instead, he places them in elaborate and deadly traps designed as moral tests to encourage self-reflection and survival through extreme sacrifice. John has a strong and twisted sense of justice and a desire to teach his victims the value of life, so he selects individuals he deems morally flawed, forcing them to confront their wrongdoings and make harrowing choices to save themselves. His traps often involve complex mechanisms and psychological torture, leaving survivors physically and emotionally scarred. Although John Kramer is a normal man, the name Jigsaw is often associated with Billy the Puppet, a doll used by Kramer to explain how the tests work, usually through video, which really gives a creepy look. Okay, we're moving into tier 2, starting with Norman Bates, Psycho. Norman Bates is the antagonist in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. He's a deeply disturbed individual shaped by his traumatic childhood and his unhealthy relationship with his mother. After the death of his father, Norman becomes intensely attached to his mother, who controls and manipulates him. When she begins a relationship with another man, Norman's jealousy leads him to murder them both. Unable to cope with the fact that he killed his own mother, Norman develops a split personality, embodying both himself and his mother. He preserves her corpse and, under her persona, continues her behavior. Norman runs the Bates Hotel, where he occasionally succumbs to his mother's persona, leading to violent outbursts and murders of guests he finds threatening or arousing. Norman has a very meek and polite demeanor, which really contrasts with the violent tendencies of his mother personality. Carrie White. Carrie. One of the most tragic villains on the list, Carrie White is a shy, introverted high school senior tormented by her peers and abused by her fanatically religious mother. After a humiliating incident at school triggers her latent telekinetic powers, Carrie is invited to the prom by a remorseful classmate's boyfriend. However, after a cruel prank at the prom where she's doused in pig's blood, she's pushed to unleash her powers, resulting in a deadly rampage that completely devastates the school and its students. Returning home, she's then attacked by her mother, whom she kills in self-defense before succumbing to her grief and causing their house to collapse, leading to her own death. Count Orlok, Nosferatu. Count Orlok is technically just a version of Dracula, but Orlok has become so recognizable in his own right that he's worth a separate entry. Even though Nosferatu is basically an adaptation of the original Dracula novel, the producers couldn't secure the rights, so they changed the name to Nosferatu and also changed the names of the characters, most notably Count Dracula to Count Orlok. I have to say though, Orlok is a great version of Dracula. His grotesque appearance with elongated fingers, pointed ears, and rat-like teeth are really creepy, and his image alone has carved a place in horror history. Besides the 1922 film, Nosferatu was also remade in 1979. This time they used all the proper names, but Dracula is clearly modeled after the original Orlok look. There's also Shadow the Vampire, which is a fictionalized biopic about the making of the 1922 film, where the director hired an actual vampire to play Orlok, which is a neat idea. Plus, Willem Dafoe plays Orlok, which is just perfect casting. Patrick Bateman, American Psycho. Patrick Bateman, portrayed by Christian Bale in the 2000 film American Psycho, is a wealthy and successful investment banker living in 1980s Manhattan who is secretly a serial killer. He's obsessed with status and appearances and embodies the superficial and materialistic culture of the era. He engages in brutal acts of murder and torture, often targeting people he believes to be beneath him, such as sex workers and homeless people, but eventually even friends and colleagues. This movie and character were originally misunderstood, but later people began to realize it was actually a dark comedy and has since become a fan favorite. Pazuzu, The Exorcist. Pazuzu is the name of the demon in The Exorcist who possesses Regan McNeil. The demon exhibits several supernatural powers, including telekinesis, levitation, and superhuman strength. It also seems to have the ability to speak in multiple languages, including ones unknown to the possessed individual, and has extensive knowledge of the people around it, using this information to taunt and manipulate. The possession leads to drastic physical changes in Regan, with her appearance becoming grotesque and her voice altering, making her one of the scariest faces in horror. Although we mostly see Pazuzu in the form of the possessed Regan, there are several times in the film where for a brief moment we see the demonic form of Pazuzu as well. Imhotep, the Mummy. Imhotep, or the Mummy, is an ancient Egyptian priest who is punished for attempting to resurrect his forbidden lover. He is mummified alive and buried with a curse. However, he becomes unwittingly resurrected in the 20th century by archaeologists. There's obviously some differences in the 1932 film and the 1999 film, but the Mummy basically has the same motivation and abilities such as immortality, telepathy, and hypnotism, although these are more subtle in the original 1932 film. The Wolfman. Another tragic villain is the Wolfman. Larry Tabolt is bitten by a werewolf while trying to save a young woman and transforms into a werewolf during the full moon. Now he must struggle with his cursed fate as he becomes a monster. There's obviously been many iterations of this monster, but the original Lon Chaney Jr. portrayal always stands out because of the outstanding effects of the time that took hours to apply. Pamela Voorhees, Friday the 13th. As I mentioned earlier, Jason Voorhees doesn't actually appear in the first Friday the 13th movie other than a dreamlike scare at the very end. Although the movie plants the idea that the killer is Jason, it's actually Pamela Voorhees, Jason's mom. After her deformed son drowned in the lake while the counselors weren't paying attention, she's sworn revenge, killing off the counselors and keeping the camp forever closed. Jerry Dandridge, Fright Night. Jerry Dandridge is the vampire antagonist in Fright Night. Jerry moves into a quiet suburban neighborhood and begins finding new victims when his neighbor Charlie finds out he's a vampire. From there, the two form an antagonistic relationship as Charlie tries to convince everyone he's a vampire and Jerry threatens to kill him. He's a great villain because he's really charming and likable, making him all the more scary when he finally transforms. Mr. Babadook, the Babadook. The Babadook is a mysterious entity that manifests through a sinister pop-up book that appears in the home of Amelia and her young son Samuel. Described in the book as a dark, shadowy figure with a top hat and long claw-like fingers, Mr. Babadook embodies the grief and unresolved trauma that Amelia experiences following the death of her husband. As the story progresses, the creature becomes increasingly real and threatening, terrorizing both mother and son with psychological torment and physical manifestations. While the Babadook is clearly symbolic, I was glad that the movie didn't do the whole "you just imagined him" thing, and I like that at least within the universe of the movie, the creature actually exists. Valak, the Conjuring. Valak is an ancient demon and the overarching antagonist in the Conjuring universe, most notably featured in The Conjuring 2 and The Nun. Valak is a sinister entity that takes on the form of a demonic nun to instill fear and manipulate its victims. Valak's true form is a horrifying skeletal figure with dark, piercing eyes and a malevolent presence. As a master of deception and fear, Valak uses psychological torment and supernatural powers to manipulate and terrorize its targets. The Blob. One of the goofiest villains on the list, the Blob is a red gelatinous space alien that consumes humans as it grows in size. Despite being kind of a silly creature, the Blob is pretty formidable as it is immune to physical damage and can't be killed. Its only weakness is cold temperatures. In the original Blob movie, they transport it to the Arctic so it will stay frozen indefinitely. Audrey 2, Little Shop of Horrors. Audrey 2 is a sentient carnivorous plant discovered by Seymour Krelborn, a florist's assistant. Initially small and seemingly harmless, it turns out the plant feeds on human blood. Seymour provides this himself at first, but as Audrey 2 grows, it requires full human bodies to consume. This continues to get out of hand, and it is eventually revealed that Audrey 2 is just a mean green mother from outer space. John Doe, 7. John Doe is the central antagonist in the movie Seven. He's obsessed with the 7 deadly sins and targets people who have committed any of these sins and then tortures and kills them. He hates the people who become openly immoral and wants to set a precedent for society with his killings. Annie Wilkes, Misery. Annie Wilkes, famously portrayed by Kathy Bates, is a former nurse with a deeply obsessive and unstable personality who becomes dangerously fixated on her favorite author, Paul Sheldon. When Paul is injured in a car accident near her remote home, Annie rescues him and takes him captive, seemingly to nurse him back to health. However, her true intentions become clear as she discovers that Paul has killed off her favorite character, Misery Chastain, in his latest novel. Enraged and delusional, Annie forces Paul to rewrite the story according to her desires, subjecting him to physical and psychological physical torture whenever he resists. Annie's personality seems to suggest that she has severe paranoia and possibly borderline personality disorder. She also has long bouts of depression and actively maims herself as well as overeating. What makes her so terrifying is that she puts on a cheerful facade while committing these horrible acts. Sam. Trick or treat. Sam is essentially the embodiment of Halloween itself. He looks like an average trick-or-treater with a large burlap sack on his head. However, his true face is revealed in the final act, and we see that he has an actual pumpkin-like head. He appears in the anthology film Trick or Treat and serves as the connecting tissue between the four stories, showing up in every segment and being the main antagonist of the fourth story. As the spirit of Halloween, he has several rules regarding the holiday, and if someone breaks them, he'll kill them. These rules consist of things like always giving trick-or-treaters candy, always wearing a costume, and never extinguishing the flame of a jack-o'-lantern before midnight. His abilities include regeneration, necromancy, teleportation, telekinesis, and has a general supernatural aura. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man. Jack Griffin, otherwise known as the Invisible Man, was one of the original Universal monsters, or at least was lumped into that group alongside Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. He was a chemist who found the formula to turn invisible. The only problem is the formula consists of a chemical that causes him to also go mad, and he eventually begins murdering people. Billy Chapman, Silent Night, Deadly Night. Billy Chapman is the Santa suit wearing killer of Silent Night, Deadly Night. As a 5-year-old, Billy watched a robber kill his father and mother while wearing a Santa suit, which traumatized him. He's then placed in an orphanage until he's 18, when he finally leaves and tries to start a new life. He gets a job at a department store, but when they ask him to dress up as Santa, he finally snaps and goes on a killing spree. Slender Man. Originally just a creepypasta, Slender Man grew so popular that he eventually was featured in several films, most notably Slender Man and Always Watching, a Marble Hornet story. Well, I'll tell you what you already know. Slenderman is depicted as unnaturally tall and thin with a blank featureless face. He's usually shown wearing a black suit and is described as having tentacle-like appendages and the ability to teleport. The Birds. The Birds are the titular threat in the classic Hitchcock flick, and the movie never actually explains why they're attacking. One day, they just decide to start killing people. I kind of like that though, because if The Birds was remade today, they'd probably make an elaborate sci-fi backstory about how human pollution or some satellite malfunction caused the birds to go into a frenzy. Sometimes it's okay to just ask, what would you do if all the birds in the world just started trying to kill you? And that's enough by itself. Triffids. The Day of the Triffids. The Triffids are carnivorous plant creatures that have the ability to move and communicate. The Triffids are unleashed after a meteor shower over Earth blinds most humans and at the same time releases Triffid spores. These towering plants have whip-like appendages equipped with venomous stingers that they use to immobilize and kill their prey. The Triffids can regenerate, making them extremely hard to damage, but the humans learn that salt water or seawater can kill them. The Creatures, Bird Box. The entities in Bird Box are mostly enigmas as their origin, motives, intent, and appearance are unknown. Anyone that looks at the creatures goes completely mad and will try to off themselves. This includes animals as well. However, some people who look at the entities see them as angels and help them to hunt down other humans. It appears that these people are already mentally unstable to begin with. There's really not much more information than that, but I like that these monsters are so vague because it gives more room for theories about what they are and their origins, which range from being alien invaders, biblical demons, and there's even a theory that the whole thing is simply mass hysteria and that there are no creatures. Brundlefly, the fly. Seth Brundle is a scientist who builds teleportation pods. He can teleport matter from one pod to the other, however he has trouble teleporting living beings. After a few messy failed attempts, he successfully teleports himself. However, unbeknownst to him, a fly got into the pod with him, merging the fly's DNA with his. At first this doesn't seem so bad as he gains immense strength and flexibility, but his personality is affected as well. He becomes hostile and dangerous, specifically to his new girlfriend. His body then begins to change more rapidly as he takes on the physical appearance of a giant insect. This is one of the quintessential body horror movies in my opinion, and I even made a whole video about it. But as Seth turns completely into Brundlefly and loses his humanity, he becomes a terrifying creature and a truly tragic villain. Henry. Portrait of a Serial Killer. Henry is a psychopathic serial killer who seems to murder indiscriminately. He's based on the real-life killer Henry Lee Lucas, aka the Confession Killer, who told police he had killed over 600 people. This number seems to be embellished, but he was connected to a large number of deaths. The Henry in the film is sent to jail as a young man for killing his mother, who was a prostitute that forced Henry to watch her in the act as a child and would punish him if he looked away. After he gets out of prison, he immediately goes on a killing spree with his friend and cellmate Otis. The two randomly break into houses and kill the families inside, even videotaping it to watch as entertainment later. There's no clear motivation for Henry other than the apparent thrill he gets from murder, and he actually seems repulsed by sex. His general philosophy seems like a twisted dog-eat-dog mentality, feeling like he must kill or be killed. What stands out out about this film in particular is the fact that Henry is the main character and he never sees justice for his crimes in the film. In fact, as the film ends, he just goes along on his way to presumably kill more victims. Benjamin Willis. I know what you did last summer. Benjamin Willis was walking home at night when a group of teenagers ran him over in their car. Assuming him to be dead, the teenagers didn't call for help, but instead dumped his body in the ocean and swore to keep the incident secret. 1 year goes by and Ben seemingly survives. He sports a fisherman's outfit and a hook, giving him the nickname the Fisherman. He now goes on a revenge killing spree against the teens. Honestly, out of the 90s slashers, this villain has some of the best motivation, and it's hard to blame him. Obviously, this doesn't make what he's doing okay, but they did almost kill the guy. Graboids, tremors. Graboids are the giant sandworm-like creatures that attack the residents of Perfection, Nevada, and other regions shortly after. There's not a clear origin of the graboids, and there's kind of mixed explanations throughout the movies, one being that they're prehistoric creatures that are older than any life form on Earth, but only grew to the large size when they had other creatures to eat, and there's some implications that they might be of alien origins. The graboids are extremely formidable monsters as they stay burrowed underground for the most part, making them hard to target. They can reach speeds up to 20 miles an hour, they're strong enough to destroy vehicles and small structures, and can eat a human whole. They mostly track their prey by sensing vibrations on the ground and moving towards that location. The Beldam, Coraline. The Beldam, or Other Mother, is the main antagonist of the 2009 animated film Coraline. She's an evil, interspatial, shape-shifting entity who lures children into another dimension with the goal of consuming their flesh. For most of the film, the Beldam takes on the appearance of Coraline's actual mother, but with slightly off features and button eyes. Other Mother slowly transforms throughout the movie, eventually taking her true skeletal arachnid form. The Beldam's abilities include shape-shifting, creating copies of other beings, and several more vague powers, controlling different aspects of the other world. Alright, let's keep it moving with Tier 3, starting with The Strangers. The Strangers consist of the three masked figures, Pinup Girl, Dollface, and Man in Mask. In The Strangers, the group begins stalking, harassing, and ultimately killing a young couple in their summer home. Their method is fairly unusual as they knock on doors, and when someone answers, they pick them as their next victim. They first mess with the couple by moving stuff around in the house and stalking them in order to scare them. Eventually, they tie them up, and when asked why, Dollface gives one of the most chilling answers in horror.
Because you were home.
There's no obvious motive, which is why people consider this such a scary movie. Whoever these three people are, they get some kind of thrill by doing this, and the movie keeps their identity anonymous. Tiffany Valentine, the bride of Chucky. Tiffany is Chucky's longtime on-again, off-again girlfriend and eventual wife. After Chucky was completely torn to bits at the end of Child's Play 3, Tiffany got his remains from an evidence locker and stitched him back together. She then uses a voodoo ritual to bring his soul back to the doll. However, they get into an argument shortly after, and she locks him in a baby pen with a bride doll. Enraged, Chucky escapes the pen and kills her before using voodoo to transfer her soul to the doll. Now they have to work together to try and find human bodies. During this journey, Tiffany and Chucky rekindle the relationship and Chucky proposes. They also have weird doll sex. And at the end of Bride of Chucky, Tiffany gives birth to an evil doll baby before dying. Of course, she's resurrected again later and must now take on the role of a mother. Tiffany is typically less angry and violent than Chucky, and she's a romantic, which makes her much more sympathetic and sweet. Despite this, she has no problem with murder and will kill whoever's in her way to get what she wants. Damien Thorne. The Omen. Damien Thorne is the son of Satan and the Antichrist. He's most well known from the original Omen film, where he's only a boy, and the adopted son of Robert and Kathy Thorne. However, this is unknown to everyone except Robert. After their real son died during childbirth, Robert is persuaded to adopt Damien, but passes him off as their actual son to his wife. As a boy, Damien has some off-putting characteristics, such as enjoying the suffering of other people, animals being afraid of him, and his fear of entering a church. Damien first kills off the family nanny by supernatural means. Later, he pushes his pregnant mother over a railing, causing her to miscarry, and finally he kills a priest by causing a lightning rod to impale him. As he enters his teen years, he becomes more aware of the fact that he is the Antichrist and accepts his calling. At this point, he has several known abilities. He can cause machinery to break down, cause people to see horrific visions and develop aneurysms, and knows vast information about virtually every known historical event. He's also immune to all major and minor mortal ailments. Eventually, he becomes a powerful politician and the leader of a satanic cult preparing for the coming of the Messiah. There's only one way to kill him, which is to lay him on a church altar and stab him with the 7 Megiddo daggers, ancient blades designed to kill Satan's progeny. Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill is the central antagonist in Silence of the Lambs. While Hannibal is definitely the villain associated with the film, Buffalo Bill is the actual serial killer that FBI agent Clarice Starling is trying to find. His real name is James Gum, a disturbed killer who kidnaps and murders women. His MO involves abducting overweight women, starving them to loosen their skin, and ultimately killing them to create a woman suit from their skin. Obviously, this started with a troubled childhood as he was placed in foster care at the age of 2. At 10 years old, he was adopted by his grandparents, however, he ends up killing them at the age of 12. He was then placed in an institution until adulthood, but of course the trouble didn't stop there. When his boyfriend leaves him for another man, Gum kills the new lover and skins him. From here, he begins his new journey of creating a beautiful skin suit, killing several women in the process. His typical tactic is to approach a woman pretending to be injured and then knocking them out. He then places them in a well he keeps in his basement and starves them until their skin is loose enough to easily remove. One disturbing aspect of the character is how he addresses his victims as it, treating them as things rather than people. He also forces them to lotion their skin in order to keep it soft, which is where Buffalo Bill's most famous quote comes from.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Margaret White, Carrie. Margaret White is the mother of Carrie and is the true villain of the film. She's a religious fanatic that subjects Carrie to an extremely strict upbringing, making her adhere to bizarre practices like locking her in a weird prayer closet where she must atone for her sins. Some of Margaret's abuse may be due to a sort of resentment over the fact that Carrie's father forced himself on Margaret, leading to Carrie's conception. When Margaret discovers Carrie's telekinetic abilities, she completely loses it and decides Carrie must be a witch and therefore must be killed. When Carrie arrives home from the prom massacre, her mother attacks her, but Carrie kills her using her new abilities. Angela Baker, Sleepaway Camp. Angela Baker is the main character we follow in Sleepaway Camp. She's a shy young girl who lives with her weirdo aunt after her father and brother Peter died in a boat accident. Angela and her cousin Ricky head off to Camp Arawak for the summer, where Angela has a tough time fitting in as she's very shy. Some of the other campers bully her, but she does develop a love interest with another camper, Paul. Suddenly, mysterious deaths begin popping up all around the camp, all seemingly associated with Angela. This all culminates in one of the biggest twists in the slasher genre and one of maybe the freakiest moments in 80s horror. It turns out that Angela is behind all the murders, and even crazier than that, Angela's true identity is that of Peter Baker. Remember at the beginning of the movie when Angela's father and brother died? Well, that wasn't Angela's brother, that was Angela. Peter actually survived. However, the weirdo aunt decided she wanted a girl since she already had a boy, and from then on treated Peter as if he was Angela. In the final haunting shot of the movie, Angela, or Peter, growls like a wild animal, fully nude with male genitals exposed. Terrifying. Gill-Man, Creature from the Black Lagoon. The Gill-Man is another classic Universal monster villain, originally appearing in Creature from the Black Lagoon, and is probably the least known of the monsters. The Gill-Man is the last surviving member of a race of amphibious humanoids. Marine biologists find some remains of this race and decide to start an expedition in search of more. In a similar fashion to King Kong, the Gill-Man, while violent and defensive, seems to have a fondness for one of the female members. In the sequel, Revenge of the Creature, the Gill-Man is captured and put in an aquarium. However, he escapes and kidnaps once again one of the female researchers. And in the third movie, The Creature Walks Among Us, he develops a land mammal's lung structure and is surgically modified to walk on land. Ginger Fitzgerald, Ginger Snaps. Ginger is one of the central characters in Ginger Snaps along with her sister Bridget. The two are social outcasts who have a fascination with death. After Ginger has her first period, the two encounter a werewolf, which infects Ginger after attacking her. From here, Ginger begins undergoing the transformation both physically and in personality. She becomes more violent, aggressive, and sexually active, which is one of the ways to spread the virus. She also begins physically morphing, growing wolf-like ears, excessive body hair, and even a tail. Eventually, Ginger fully transforms and her sister Bridget is forced to kill her. In the sequel, Ginger returns as a spirit watching over her sister. Kayako Saiki, The Grudge. Kayako was a quiet and introverted housewife living in Tokyo, harboring an unrequited love for a college professor. Her life took a tragic turn when her husband discovered her diary, which detailed her feelings for the professor, and in a fit of rage, he brutally murders Kayako, their young son Toshio, and the family cat. This terrible act created a powerful curse that attached to the house, causing anyone who entered to be haunted and eventually killed by the vengeful spirits. Kayako is instantly recognizable within the J-horror space with her pale skin, long black hair, hair, contorted body, and of course the strange croaking sound she makes. Her terrifying presence, I think, is captured perfectly in the classic staircase scene. David, the Lost Boys. David is the charismatic and menacing leader of a gang of teenage vampires in The Lost Boys. He has the typical vampire abilities, including flight, enhanced strength, immortality, and supernatural levels of persuasion. He uses these skills to slowly convince Michael, the protagonist of the movie, to join his gang, eventually turning him into a vampire. It's unclear how old David really is, as his past is kept pretty secret. Santanico Pandemonium, from Dusk Till Dawn. Santanico is the seductive vampire queen of the Titty Twister, a vampire-filled bar in Mexico. Originally, she was a young woman named Esmeralda in the year 1913, but is turned into a vampire by her mother. For decades after this, she runs the Titty Twister and feeds on patrons who wander in, until the Gecko brothers and Fuller family show up and begin killing the vampires inside, including the vampire queen herself, Christine. Christine is a 1958 Plymouth Fury. Yeah, this is maybe one of the most unusual villains on here. Christine kills anyone who messes with her new owner, Arnie. The car seems to have some kind of power over Arnie that leads him to become obsessed with it. He dumps his girlfriend and even abandons his parents. It's unclear exactly what Christine is, but we do know the previous owner also became obsessed with the car. The owner's daughter was choked to death inside the car, and shortly after, both the owner and his wife died inside as well. So it may be that the car is possessed by the spirits of the dead, but Christine does seem to have a personality of its own. Dr. Joseph Hyder, the human centipede. Dr. Hyder is probably the most disturbing villain so far. Hyder was originally a renowned German surgeon. In fact, he was the leading surgeon in separating conjoined twins. However, he became bored of separating and instead wanted to create. He became obsessed with the idea of joining two bodies together to function as one. At first, he did this with 3 dogs, but they died shortly after surgery. Next, he kidnaps 3 tourists, American friends Lindsay and Jenny, and a Japanese man named Katsuro. He performs a grotesque surgery on the 3, attaching their mouths and anuses, forming what he calls a Siamese triplet, or his nickname for it, the human centipede. One of the most disturbing aspects of Hyder is how he treats the 3 captives as a single entity and calls it his pet. Besides the fact that he will go to any lengths to succeed in his creation, he is unnecessarily cruel. When Lindsay attempts to escape, Hyder puts her in the middle of the centipede as punishment, explaining that it is the most painful section. Joseph Hyder was based on the real-life villain and Nazi Joseph Mengele, who is sometimes called the Angel of Death for the horrific and disturbing human experiments he performed on prisoners of Auschwitz. Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd was originally Benjamin Barker, a barber and family man living a charming life with his beautiful wife Lucy and baby daughter Joanna. Unfortunately, a corrupt judge, Tarpon, wanted Barker's wife for himself and had Barker sent away in order to take his wife. Well, Lucy tried to poison herself and went insane, and so the judge took Joanna as his own daughter. 15 years later, Benjamin returns to London as Sweeney Todd, seeking revenge. He rents a room from Miss Lovett, a landlady, and opens a barber shop. While waiting for a chance to kill Judge Tarpon and get his revenge, he begins slaughtering his patrons, slitting their throats with his straight razor. In the meantime, Miss Lovett begins using the corpses to create meat pies that actually become a huge hit in the town. The Tall Man, Phantasm. The Tall Man is a supernatural undertaker from another dimension who reanimates the dead into dwarf-like minions to serve him. He controls an arsenal of deadly flying silver spheres that drill into and kill his victims. The Tall Man was once a mortal human mortician named Jebediah Morningside. After becoming fascinated with the connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead, he began experimenting in interdimensional travel, seeking to become immortal. He did manage to create a machine that could travel between worlds, but after stepping through the gate, Jebediah was no more, and only the Tall Man remained. It's unclear what happened to Jebediah exactly, but the theories range from a higher intelligence possessing him or taking on his likeness to him radically changing due to what he experienced in the worlds beyond. He is essentially trying to become the Lord of the Dead as he invades towns, wiping out the population and turning the dead into his slaves. The Armitage Family. Get Out. Just a spoiler warning here, as this is one of those movies with a big twist. The Armitage family is a seemingly normal and inviting family, however they are actually part of a secret cult. They kidnap young black people, and using a bizarre surgical procedure, the family transfers the consciousness of old white people into their bodies, which they then control. The original person is still inside the body, but can no longer control it, being forced to stay trapped in what is called the sunken place. Blair Witch. The Blair Witch is the central unseen antagonist in the Blair Witch Project and its sequels. The entity is said to haunt the Black Hills Forest near Burkittsville, Maryland. According to local legends, the Blair Witch is the vengeful spirit of Ellie Kedward, a woman accused of witchcraft and executed in the 18th century. Her curse on the town and its inhabitants manifests through mysterious and malevolent occurrences within the forest. The Blair Witch torments and psychologically manipulates those who enter her domain, leading them to become disoriented and paranoid. Her appearance is ambiguous, as her victims have seen her take various forms, but most seem to be something like an old hag, sometimes floating and sometimes not. The best look we've ever gotten of the witch is in the 2016 film, where she appears to be a large malformed creature resembling an old woman with witch-like features. However, even the director said that this apparition, along with the others in the series, are simply victims of the witch, possessed and used as puppets. Art the Clown, Terrifier. Art the Clown is the main antagonist of the Terrifier series, but has been featured in other previous works, namely All Hallows Eve. He's one of the most mysterious on this tier, with no clear background or motives other than wreaking havoc and brutally murdering people. In Terrifier, he seems pretty much human. However, spoilers here, Art dies at the end of Terrifier, and in Terrifier 2, he is brought back by a mysterious entity known as the Pale Girl. From here, Art is able to withstand inhuman levels of damage, and although it appears Art is killed again at the end of Terrifier 2, the Pale Girl takes his head, and a disturbing after-credit scene implies he lives again. So there's a ton of mystery surrounding Art the Clown, and once you throw the Pale Girl entity into the mix, fans have had a field day coming up with theories. Pod People, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Pod People are existential beings that replicate humans by growing in large seed pods, producing identical but emotionless duplicates that replace the originals while they sleep. The Pod People operate as a hive mind and work collectively to slowly take over. The origins of these aliens are unknown, but Earth is likely not the first planet they've invaded, as the seed pods drift through space and begin propagating their species wherever they land. The Thing. The Thing is a parasitic extraterrestrial life form that crash landed in Antarctica. It has no fixed appearance, as it can perfectly mimic any living organism it assimilates, revealing grotesque, monstrous forms when exposed. This creature is a highly intelligent life form, using the memories and knowledge of its victims to blend in and manipulate situations. Its primary traits include shapeshifting and cellular mimicry. However, it is vulnerable to fire and intense heat. One notable detection method is a blood test, as separated parts of the alien will try to survive independently. Its origins are unknown, but it's clear that the alien race it belongs to is fairly advanced, as it came to Earth by advanced means of space travel. One interesting detail in the 2011 prequel is that the Thing cannot replicate inorganic material, meaning that anyone with metal implants, piercings, or dental fillings cannot be perfectly replicated. Rose the Hat, Dr. Sleep. Rose the Hat is leader of the True Knot, a cult-like group of psychic vampires. These entities feed on steam, a life force emitted by individuals with the Shining when they experience pain and fear. She's identifiable by her distinctive top hat and possesses powerful telepathic abilities, which she uses to track and manipulate her victims. Rose and the True Knot seek out children who shine, torturing and killing them to extract their steam. Her primary target becomes Abra Stone, a young girl with exceptionally potent abilities. Rose's pursuit of Abra brings her into conflict with Dan Torrance, the son of Jack Torrance in The Shining, who is now an adult. The Tethered, Us. This one has some heavy spoilers, so fair warning. The Tethered are part of a government experiment aimed at controlling the population by creating clones of every individual. However, the experiment was abandoned, and the Tethered were left to live in squalor, mimicking the actions of their counterparts above ground in a grotesque and distorted manner. They possess all the abilities of their counterparts, plus they seem to have enhanced strength, as well as the ability to anticipate their doppelgangers' movements from mirroring them for so long. However, they have no ability to speak and basically have no souls, for lack of a better term. The Tethered begin a rebellion against their surface counterparts, led by Red, the doppelganger of Adelaide Wilson, the protagonist of the film. The main group of Tethered we see are the counterparts of the Wilson family, as they attempt, along with the other clones, to take the place of those on the surface. Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead is a demonic entity summoned for revenge. In the events of the movie, a man named Ed Harley summons Pumpkinhead to avenge the death of his son, who is killed by reckless teenagers on dirt bikes. Ed takes his son's body to a witch, who then summons Pumpkinhead, warning that it will come at a cost. The demon, Pumpkinhead, is a tall, thin creature with no fur and pale skin. He has a large bulbous head that has a reddish hue, presumably the trait that's given him his nickname. Pumpkinhead has superhuman strength and is virtually immortal, stopping at nothing until all those he's been called to kill are dead. Whoever summons the demon becomes connected to it, feeling the pain of the people it kills, and even sees through the eyes of Pumpkinhead while it kills. This link between the demon and its summoner is actually part of Pumpkinhead's only weakness, as the only way to stop the demon before he finishes the revenge mission is to kill the summoner. Rhoda Penmark, the Bad Seed. succeed. Rhoda Pinmark is one of the original killer kids, predating the Omen by 20 years. Unlike Damien, Rhoda isn't demonic, but just a straightforward psychopath. Rhoda murders her classmate Cloud when he wins a penmanship medal Rhoda believes she deserved, and then kills a handyman who mentions her association with Cloud's death. Because of Rhoda's charming exterior, no one suspects her of her crimes except for Christine, Rhoda's mother. It turns out that Christine's mother, Rhoda's grandmother, was also a psychopathic killer, and it seems that this trait skipped a generation. Krug-Stillo, The Last House on the Left. Krug-Stillo is the ruthless and unforgiving gang leader in The Last House on the Left. After his heroin-addicted son Junior lures two high school girls back to an apartment, they're taken out to the woods where Krug and his gang humiliate, torture, and kill them. Krug is the embodiment of brutality with no remorse for his actions. At one point, he even carves his name into the chest of one of the girls, and later in the film, he tries to convince his own son to kill himself. Luckily, this is a revenge film. When Krug takes refuge in one of the girls' parents' house, unbeknownst to them, the parents find out what happened and hatch a plan to get revenge on the gang, killing them off one by one. The Creeper. Jeepers Creepers. The Creeper is a mysterious and almost immortal creature that emerges from hibernation every 23 years to feed on humans for 23 days straight. While mostly humanoid, the Creeper has leathery and grayish green skin, sharp teeth, and an alien-like hood that is normally lying flat against his head but sometimes expands into a wide fringe of webbed insect-like appendages. The Creeper has superhuman strength and agility, an enhanced sense of smell used to stalk his prey, large bat-like wings giving him the ability to fly, and most predominantly the ability to regenerate. He can regenerate lost and damaged body parts by eating the corresponding parts of his victims. While the origin of the Creeper is unknown, we do know that he has been around for centuries at least. In the Jeepers Creepers comic series Trail of the Beast, he orchestrated a human sacrifice ritual during the time of the Aztecs and later devoured European settlers, even being responsible for the disappearance of the Roanoke colony. While he is beast-like, he does have some human qualities. He's seen whistling in the first and third movie and is even a bit of an artist. Although his art does involve collecting and stitching together human bodies in an underground lair called the House of Pain. The Leprechaun. Maybe one of my favorite horror villains, the Leprechaun is a horrific twist on the classic folklore creature. Well, actually, according to the film, the folklore was based off of this leprechaun. He's an immortal creature that's lived for centuries and is obsessed with gold. If anyone takes even a piece of his gold, he'll stop at nothing to retrieve it, killing anyone in his way. The leprechaun's dressed in typical green garb and has red hair, although he lacks the childlike look of traditional leprechauns, instead having wrinkled gray skin and black lips. Originally, he was rooted in Ireland, but after Dan O'Grady took his gold and fled to America, the leprechaun followed, and all the films take place in the States after this. The leprechaun's abilities include all sorts of trickery, including telekinesis, mind control, casting illusions, teleportation, and enhanced speed and strength. What really makes the leprechaun stand out as a villain is his humor and personality. Much like Freddy, he finds creative and amusing ways to kill his victims, and we have to give major props to actor Warwick Davis for bringing the character to life. While the first Leprechaun movie set the tone as a somewhat serious slasher film with some comedic elements, the sequels basically go full comedy with outrageous kills and a non-stop stream of rhyming one-liners from the Leprechaun, including the Leprechaun in the Hood movies where he even raps. He also went to space in Leprechaun 4, which is the most bizarre film of them all, being a straight-up sci-fi fantasy movie with the murderous leprechaun thrown into the mix. This one takes place in the future and the leprechaun is on an alien planet. Although the most recent film, The Leprechaun Returns, actually retcons all the sequels and takes place immediately after the first movie. Bagul, Sinister. Bagul, also known as Mr. Boogie, is an ancient pagan deity who consumes the souls of children, drawing them into his dark realm. He's a tall, eerie figure with a pale face and dark, hollow eyes, often seen in grainy, unsettling home movies. Bagul's method involves influencing and corrupting children through these films, convincing them to murder their families and record the acts. Once the children have carried this out, Bagul captures their souls, condemning them to an eternity in his nightmarish domain. Belial Bradley, Basket Case. Belial and his brother Dwayne were conjoined twins who were surgically separated. While Dwayne looks like an average young man, his brother Belial is completely deformed, essentially being only a disfigured head with arms. Because of this, Dwayne is forced to carry him around in a giant basket. He lacks the ability to speak, but can telepathically communicate with his brother, and the two can sense each other's emotions. The brother's main goal is to get revenge on the surgeon that separated them. This is mostly led by Belial. While Dwayne comes off actually pretty timid and kind, Belial is a bloodthirsty brute hell-bent on revenge, and he's getting pretty fed up being hidden and stuck in a basket all day. When Dwayne falls in love, Belial freaks the hell out and goes on a rampage, eventually pitting brother against brother. While the first film is pretty dark, the sequels take a more comical approach. Belial actually meets a girl with a similar deformity, and they even have kids, which just look like little baby versions of Belial. The Phantom of the Opera. The Phantom is a mysterious, disfigured musical genius who lives in the labyrinth tunnels beneath the opera house. He falls in love with Christine, a beautiful young soprano. Using his influence and threats, he helps Christine rise to stardom, but his love turns to obsession as he demands her love in return. There's been many iterations of this character, but I always preferred the 1925 version played by Lon Chaney because it feels the most like a horror, mostly due to Chaney's groundbreaking makeup which he applied himself. Mama. Mama, originally known as Edith Brennan, was a patient in a mental institution in the 19th century. After escaping the institution, Edith took her infant daughter and fled, but was pursued by authorities. In a desperate attempt to escape, Edith jumped off a cliff into a lake, clutching her baby. While Edith died from the fall, her child was caught on a branch and didn't follow her into the water. Edith's spirit, unable to move on due to her anguish and longing for her child, became a vengeful ghost, wandering the forest in search of her lost baby. In the present, two young girls, Victoria and Lily, are found 5 years after their disappearance in this forest. While lost in the woods, Mama watched over them. Now that they've been found, they stay with their uncle and his girlfriend, although Mama has grown attached to them and begins stalking the family. Mama is a tall and gaunt figure with a messed up face, and her movements are jerky and unnatural, which is partly what makes her so creepy. She has some typical ghost abilities as well, like levitation and the ability to phase through walls. The Firefly family, House of a Thousand Corpses. The Firefly family are the central antagonists in House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, and most recently, Three from Hell. In House of a Thousand Corpses, they're a family of psychotic serial killers. Most notably are Captain Spaulding, Otis, and Baby. Captain Spaulding is a dirty-mouthed clown and patriarch of the family who runs a gas station / roadside haunted house. Otis is the most disturbed of the family, killing people and mutilating their bodies, turning them into freak shows for Captain Spaulding's attraction, as well as wearing their faces as masks. Baby is the only other female in the family besides Mother Firefly, and is just as sadistic, luring victims back to her house while posing as a hitchhiker. These three serve as the main characters in Devil's Rejects and Three from Hell, and these movies follow them as they're on the run after the events of the first movie. The Entity. It Follows. Sometimes called It or The Curse, the entity in It Follows is mostly mysterious with no clear origin and a limited idea of its abilities. The basic concept of It Follows is that there's a curse, and anyone who has it will eventually be killed by this entity. We don't know how the curse started, but we know that the only way to remove the curse is through sexual intercourse. However, when the current holder is killed by the entity, it will then track the last cursed person, working its way back presumably to the original carrier. The entity can take the form of any human and oftentimes looks like a person familiar to the cursed, although it changes its form every time it's out of sight. Essentially, the entity slowly walks towards the victim, never running, but also never losing stamina and constantly approaching them. Brahms Hillshire, the boy. This is one of those big spoiler entries, so fair warning. Brahms is initially believed to be a porcelain doll that an elderly couple, the Hillshires, treat as their son, following the tragic death of their real son Brahms in a fire 20 years earlier. When Greta, an American nanny, is hired to care for the doll, she's given a strict set of bizarre rules. Soon, strange supernatural events begin happening, like the doll moving by itself. In a huge twist, it's revealed that the real Brahms is alive, having survived the fire and grown up. He's now hiding within the walls of the family mansion. Brahms, now a disturbed adult, manipulates the doll in the household. Turns out Brahms actually killed a young girl, and the fire was a cover-up for the murder, which is why his parents protect him by keeping him hidden. I love that the doll isn't controlled by a demon like Annabelle or possessed by a murderer like Chucky, but instead the doll is just a doll. But a creepy-ass dude is living in the walls. I guess because it seems like this could really happen. Esther Coleman, orphan. Esther is a seemingly innocent girl adopted by the Coleman family. After some strange occurrences revolving around Esther, like her breaking the leg of a classmate, it's revealed that Esther is not a child, but a 33-year-old woman suffering from a rare hormonal disorder called hypopituitarism, which stunts her physical growth and gives her the appearance of a child. She's a violent and cunning psychopath who has a history of infiltrating families, attempting to seduce the fathers, and killing anyone who stands in her way. It's worth noting that Esther was inspired by the real-life story of Barbara Skrylova, a 33-year-old woman who posed as a 13-year-old boy to avoid police after being involved in a weird child-abusing cult. More recently was the Natalie Grace incident, which was another similar case, although this actually happened after Orphan. Giant Ants. Them. This one's pretty self-explanatory. The giant ants in them are created as a result of atomic radiation from nuclear tests, which increases their size. They still maintain their hierarchical structure with a giant queen leading them. Bathsheba Sherman, The Conjuring. Bathsheba is the original antagonist of the first Conjuring film. She was a 19th century woman accused of witchcraft and child murder who allegedly sacrificed her infant to the devil and cursed her land before committing suicide. Her ghost haunts the Perron family's farmhouse on Rhode Island, exhibiting powers such as possession and manipulation of the physical environment. Bathsheba particularly targets mothers, attempting to force them to kill their own children. Her horrific influence leads the Perron family to seek help from paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who uncover her dark history and perform an exorcism to save the family. Dr. Caligari, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Dr. Caligari is a hypnotist who uses a sleepwalker named Cesar, or maybe Cesari, let me know in the comments, to commit murders in a small German town. He presents himself as a carnival showman, showcasing Cesar, who is kept in a state of perpetual sleep and obeys Caligari's command. The story follows Francis, a man investigating Dr. Caligari, to get to the bottom of the murders. However, in a twist ending, it turns out that Francis and Cesar are inmates in an insane asylum and that Dr. Caligari is actually just the director of the asylum. Ellie, Let the Right One In. Ellie is a centuries-old vampire who appears as a pale 12-year-old child living in a bleak suburb of Stockholm. Despite looking like a kid, Ellie possesses the strength, agility, and predatory instincts of a vampire. She forms a bond with Oscar, a lonely and bullied boy who lives in the same apartment complex. Ellie's survival depends on consuming human blood, and she relies on her caretaker to bring her humans to feast on. Ellie does show moments of vulnerability and compassion, particularly in her interactions with Oscar. Brenda Bates, Urban Legend. Another spoiler warning here, Brenda Bates is the mysterious killer in Urban Legend. She specifically kills her victims in a fashion that replicates various urban legends. This is all done as an act of revenge after the death of her fiancé, David Evans, who died in a car accident caused by the film's protagonist, Natalie Simon, and her friend Michelle. As a prank, the girls turned off their car's headlights and then chased the first vehicle that flashed its headlights at them, which happened to be David's car, eventually leading to a car accident. Because of the urban legend angle, Brenda uses creative methods to kill her victims, like forcing pop rocks and other chemicals down a guy's throat to emulate the myth of dying by eating pop rocks and soda, and my personal favorite, putting a student's dog in the microwave based on the old lady dries a dog in the microwave legend. 6 Demons, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. This is referring to the 6 different demonic entities that possess Emily Rose. It's revealed during the attempted exorcism when Father Richard Moore demands the demons say his name, and instead he gets 6 names: Cain, Nero, Judas, Legion, Belial, and Lucifer. The film is actually based on the real-life exorcism of Anneliese Mitchell, and these 6 names are based on the supposed demons that possessed Anneliese. However, the real-life 6 included Hitler and Priest Fleischmann instead of Belial and Legion. The number can be debated here, as Cain, Nero, and Judas are all humans, not demons, but we can assume for the sake of the movie that they're referring to the demonic spirits that possibly possessed them. Also, Legion comes from the New Testament when Jesus casts demons out of a herd of pigs. When he asks their name, they say, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So honestly, who knows how many demons reside in Emily Rose. But this is moving from horror villain Iceberg to Sunday school real quick, so let's keep it moving. Norman Nordstrom, Don't Breathe. Norman is a blind army vet who received $300,000 as compensation after his daughter was killed in a car accident. Some young delinquents learn about Norman's small fortune and the fact that he's blind and decide he's an easy target plotting to rob him. Well, they were very, very wrong, as Norman is more cunning than they thought, shutting the lights off and using his enhanced hearing to track the intruders down and take them out. So far, he's not much of a villain, but instead kind of just a badass defending himself in a home invasion. But here comes the big twist. Spoilers ahead. It turns out that Norman, in an act of revenge, kidnapped the woman who killed his daughter in the car accident and kept her hostage in his basement. Worse than that, in a kind of sick eye for an eye mentality, he impregnated her using a turkey baster in order to replace his daughter. Yeah, man, this guy's a freak. Well, one of the would-be robbers manages to survive the attack after almost killing Norman in the escape. In Don't Breathe 2, Norman actually has some positive character development, becoming more of an anti-hero, and it looks like we're likely to get a 3rd movie at some point. Hill People, The Hills Have Eyes. The Hill People's origin varies between the original 1977 film and the 2006 remake, but the basic idea is the same in both. They're a family of deformed murdering cannibals who live in the desert and kidnap travelers to kill and eat. In the original film, the family patriarch, Papa Jupiter, was once an evil child who killed his sister. He eventually shacks up with an insane prostitute, and they have several deformed children. In the 2006 remake, the Hill People are the result of nuclear testing in the New Mexico desert. The family are the descendants of miners who refuse to leave, causing the children to be exposed to heavy radiation and to become deformed. When a family's passing through the area, they go on the attack. This is one of the rare instances, along with The Fly, where I actually prefer the remake to the original. I think the Hill people are much scarier and disturbing. The most standout to me is Big Brain, a wheelchair-bound family member who has an enlarged sack-like head. The remake doesn't feature Papa Jupiter hardly at all, but there's actually some really cool concept art that suggests he was supposed to have a parasitic twin on his chest, but this got cut from the movie. Rawhead Rex. Rawhead Rex is a monstrous ancient pagan deity accidentally unleashed from his underground prison in rural Ireland. He has a grotesque humanoid appearance featuring sharp teeth, glowing red eyes, and a mane of wild hair. As Rawhead Rex rampages through the countryside, he leaves a trail of gruesome murders and destruction, targeting anyone in his path. The film is actually based on a Clive Barker novel, and there are some large differences between the two. For instance, Rawhead is described in the novel as essentially looking like a giant phallus and mainly sets out to have his way with women, while in the film he looks more like a mutant beast and is focused more on killing. Rawhead seems to have the ability to convince people to follow him, most notably a priest, and I have to say, while the novel is much more disturbing overall, in the film, Rawhead baptizes the priest by urinating on him. It's one of the weirdest and most uncomfortable moments I've seen in a while. Cujo. Cujo is everybody's favorite killer dog. After chasing a rabbit into a bat cave, Cujo is bitten by a bat and contracts rabies. He then kills anyone who goes near him. Not much more to say on this one, other than it's interesting to note that Stephen King, who wrote the original novel, said he doesn't even remember writing this book, as it was one of the books he wrote while completely addicted to cocaine and alcohol. Demons. The Amityville Horror. The Amityville Horror is based on the supposed true events experienced by the Lutz family after they moved into a house in Amityville, New York. In the film, the family encounters several supernatural entities and phenomena that seem to be related to the fact that a man killed his entire family in the house 1 year prior. Eventually, the family finds out that the house was built on a Native American burial site and that a devil worshiper lived on the property at some point after. In the original film, the alien-bodied demon is that of Jody the pig, who first seems to be the imaginary friend of one of the children, but reveals itself as a demonic entity taking the shape of a red-eyed pig. Amityville 2, The Possession, is a prequel that focuses on the family who lived in the house before the Lutz. In this film, a demon possesses the family's teenage son, who then kills his family. We get a pretty good look at the actual demon during the exorcism of the son, and in Amityville Dollhouse, we see several demons, one appearing to be the devil himself, followed by his minions. William Weir, Event Horizon. Dr. William Weir was the lead designer of a spaceship called the Event Horizon that has the ability to travel faster than light and travel to distant parts of the universe. However, the ship vanished during its original voyage. Dr. Weir, along with a space crew, board a rescue vessel sent to investigate the Event Horizon once it mysteriously reappeared in orbit around Neptune. The crew is forced aboard the Event Horizon after the rescue ship is damaged, and they find through a series of video logs that the previous crew had gone completely insane, fornicating and then mutilating each other in horrific ways. It appears that when the ship vanished, it was actually cast into another dimension that is essentially hell. From here, the ship itself begins to mess with the new crew, forcing them to hallucinate in response to their fears. Dr. Weir begins seeing his dead wife, who mysteriously took her own life while he was still building Event Horizon. Overwhelmed by the sight of his wife, the ship convinces Weir to assist in returning Event Horizon into the hell dimension once again. He does some horrific things along the way, and he also gets his eyes gouged out at one point, which is pretty disturbing. Later, the ship somehow restores his eyesight, but he takes a strange form with large symbolic cuts all over his body. The Toys, Demonic Toys. This one's pretty straightforward. These are just toys who are possessed by demonic spirits, each with its own characteristics. Jack Attack is a Jack-in-the-Box toy with razor-sharp teeth. Grizzly Teddy is a teddy bear that can transform into a large beast. Mr. Static is a robot soldier who can fire energy blasts. And Baby Oopsie Daisy is a killer baby doll that actually got a whole spin-off series. The toys are brought to life by a powerful demon known simply as the Kid, who takes the form of a young boy and is trying to be reborn into the physical world. Roy Burns. Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning. This is probably one of the strangest twists in the Friday the 13th franchise that requires a little bit of explanation before we get to Roy Burns. In the previous film, The Final Chapter, Jason is killed by a young Tommy Jarvis, and this film takes place a few years later following a teenage Tommy who's now haunted by the traumatic events he suffered through. He's transferred to a halfway house with a group of other teens. However, shortly after arriving, one of the teens, Joey, is killed by another enraged teen, Vic, who shortly after they're arrested. Strangely enough, a series of murders begins, and Tommy can't help but shake the fact that Jason is somehow back and hunting him down. And this is all but proven when a figure wearing the iconic mask finally reveals himself. Tommy gets the better of him though, and it is then revealed that this is not Jason, but Roy Burns, the father of Joey, the kid who got killed earlier. Basically, his son's death drove him mad, and he began going on a killing spree inspired by the Camp Crystal Lake killings. It's kind of a bizarre turn of events, and this makes it the second and last Friday the 13th movie to not feature Jason as the main antagonist. Reverend Henry Kane, Poltergeist 2. Henry Kane is the main antagonist in the Poltergeist movies, mostly the second and third movie, as we don't actually see his physical form in the first movie. He was once a charismatic and fanatical preacher who led a doomsday cult in the early 19th century. Believing that the end of the world was imminent, he convinced his followers to retreat with him to an underground cavern. When his apocalyptic predictions didn't come true, Kane refused to let anyone leave, resulting in the death of his entire congregation, including himself. This act of mass murder left his spirit cursed and bound to the earthly plane. In Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, Kane's spirit relentlessly pursues the Freeling family, particularly targeting the young daughter, Carol Ann, who has a unique sensitivity to the supernatural. Kane's goal is to capture Carol Ann and use her life force to gain power and escape his spectral imprisonment. Lester Lowe, Silver Bullet. Reverend Lowe is a seemingly respectable minister in the small town of Tarker's Mill. However, unbeknownst to his congregation, he is actually a werewolf responsible for a series of brutal murders plaguing the town. It's unknown how long Lowe has been a werewolf and how he became one. It's clear though that he doesn't actually see his ailment as a curse, but instead a blessing, using his transformation to kill those he deems immoral. However, he himself kills innocent people when they get close to discovering his secret. Connell Cochran, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Halloween 3 is the black sheep of the Halloween franchise. Originally, John Carpenter intended each movie to have a different setting and story, but since the first two movies featured Michael Myers, people were confused and pissed off that the third movie had nothing to do with everyone's favorite new killer. In retrospect, most fans of the series actually credit Halloween 3 as being great in its own right. Halloween 3's villain is Connell Cochran. Cochran is the wealthy and charismatic owner of Silver Shamrock Novelties, a company producing popular Halloween masks. Secretly, Cochran is a modern-day warlock with an evil agenda. He plans to use the masks embedded with microchips containing fragments of a stolen Stonehenge rock to execute a mass sacrifice on Halloween night. When the Silver Shamrock commercial jingle plays, the masks will activate, causing horrific deaths that align with ancient Celtic rituals. Pretty dark in concept and an interesting idea. Chad, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This is a great movie and one of the few comedies on the list. It follows Tucker and Dale, two well-meaning hillbillies who are looking forward to a relaxing vacation at their dilapidated mountain cabin, which they plan to fix up. At the same time, a group of college students is camping in the same area. Through a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, the students come to believe that Tucker and Dale are murderous backwoods killers, leading to a series of tragic and comedic deaths. Chad is one of these teens and has a dark history as his parents were killed by hillbillies when he was young, leaving him with a deep-seated resentment and prejudice towards folks like Tucker and Dale. His fear is the root of all the deaths in the film, including his friends. When Tucker and Dale save one of the girls, Allison, from drowning, Chad believes that they actually kidnapped her and decides he must kill them.
Ah, we got your friend! Oh God! They got Allison! That's your friend! Why the hell are they running away? Hey!
He becomes more deranged as the movie moves forward, and by the end he goes full villain. Even after learning this was all a misunderstanding, he tries to kill the pair and even Allison, cutting off Tucker's fingers in the process. The Engineers, Prometheus. We already touched on the Engineers as part of the Xenomorphs entry, so I'll make this brief, but the Engineers are revealed to be the creators of humanity, having seeded Earth with their own DNA millions of years ago. Their motivations remain largely mysterious, but they possess an advanced knowledge of genetic engineering. This is most notable in the creation of the Xenomorphs, which are used as a bioweapon designed to eradicate other species. Deacon Frost, Blade. Deacon Frost is a vampire who seeks to overthrow the traditional vampire hierarchy and establish a new order where turned vampires like himself are supreme. Disdained by the pureblood vampires who have made treaties with the human government, Frost aims to awaken La Magra, the blood god, to gain godlike powers and make vampires the dominant species. Frank / the Mother, Barbarian. Big spoilers here, and this one is pretty recent, so fair warning. The Iceberg chart only lists the Mother on here, but I'll throw Frank in since he's tied into it. The Mother is the main threat in Barbarian. Her father, Frank, was a serial killer and rapist who would then keep the resulting children of his victims, and when they were old enough, do the same to them. He also videotapes these assaults so he can watch it back later. The Mother is the product of several generations of this, leading to her deformed appearance, lack of speech skills, and batshit behavior. She's also completely naked at all times, which which isn't very fun to look at. She lives in underground tunnels built under Frank's house where he kept his victims. The mother takes in any person she can find and forces them to act as her children, since this is the whole purpose of her existence. Part of her motherly yearnings are also due to the fact that the only source of entertainment she has in the tunnels is a VHS instructional tape on breastfeeding. She's highly protective over her would-be children, but ultimately ends up killing them herself when they act out. She can do this easily as she has almost supernatural strength and resilience. Okay, let's get into tier 4, starting with Chop Top Sawyer, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Robert Sawyer, or Chop Top, is one of the main antagonists of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, along with Leatherface, his brother. During the events of the first film, Chop Top was actually an infantry soldier in Vietnam. However, he was sliced in the head by a machete and managed to survive, although a metal plate was grafted onto his skull. From there, he rejoined the family, assisting in all of their seedy activities. Chop Top definitely steals the show in this film, mostly because he's such an insane character and a major part of the dark comedy here. He talks in a really weird and erratic way, constantly smiling. He also wears wigs in order to cover up the metal plate on his head, which has become exposed. This is due to the fact that he constantly carries around a metal hanger, which he heats up with a lighter and uses to pick at the skin around the plate. Worse than that, he actually takes the skin he picks off and eats it. Gross. This notable performance comes from none other than Bill Moseley, who we mentioned last tier for his performance of Otis Driftwood in Rob Zombie's Firefly trilogy. The Werewolf, an American Werewolf in London. It's actually unclear to me whether this entry is referring to the original werewolf that infects the main character David near the beginning of the film, or if it's meaning David himself, who becomes the werewolf that we see more prominently. I also feel like this should probably be higher up on the Berg, but whatever, let's just get into it. So the original werewolf that attacks David and his friend Jack is only seen briefly, and the only good look we actually get is his human form as he's killed and reverts back to a man. David in werewolf form we see much more throughout the film, and there's not much more to say about it other than of course mentioning that this movie is kind of the GOAT when it comes to werewolf transformation scenes. There's also some interesting lore here as well. David's friend Jack, who is killed by the werewolf, doesn't fully die. He becomes undead and continues to talk with David throughout the movie, being forced to walk between life and death until the werewolf's bloodline is ended. That's kind of an interesting angle that I hadn't seen in a werewolf movie before. Dr. Giggles. Evan Rendell Jr., aka Dr. Giggles, is a homicidal maniac who begins killing the residents of Moore High, disguised as a doctor. Well, the backstory here is that Evan's mother died due to a heart condition of some kind when he was a kid, and his father went mad, killing residents of Moore High and ripping out their hearts to try and resurrect his dead wife. Eventually, the deaths were traced back to Dr. Rendell and he was killed by the police, but Evan Jr. escaped, never to be seen again until now. 30 years later, he escapes a mental asylum where he's only known as Dr. Giggles because of his disturbing laughter. He returns to Moore High to continue where his father left off, becoming obsessed with a teenage girl who has a heart condition similar to his mother's. He makes a really fun villain because every kill is basically an excuse for some kind of pun.
He should have kept his hands to himself.
He uses all kinds of medical devices to kill his victims, and it's usually accompanied by some kind of one-liner, and of course his creepy giggles. It's cheesy and hasn't aged all that well, but it's entertaining, and I'll give it credit, there are actually a lot of kills, giving Dr. Giggles plenty of screen time, which can be rare for a slasher villain. Sebastian Cain, Hollow Man. We covered the Invisible Man back on tier 2. Well, Hollow Man is a much darker adaptation of the original novel by H.G. Wells, while still carrying the same general theme. The film follows Sebastian Cain, a scientist working for the Pentagon to formulate a serum that can turn living beings invisible. After successfully turning a gorilla invisible and then visible again, Cain and his team are ready to report their progress to the Pentagon, but Cain lies, asking for an extension for the project, keeping them from taking over the program. Cain then convinces his team to continue on to human trials without permission and uses himself as the subject. From this point on, much like Jack Griffin, the serum seems to slowly work Cain into madness as he becomes more aggressive and immature. He initially starts by simply pranking the team, but eventually fondles one of them in her sleep. And I wish I could say that was the least of Cain's sexual deviance, but it gets much worse. After being stuck in the lab for 10 days, he escapes to go to his own apartment. When he sees his neighbor undressing, he sneaks into her apartment and has his way with her, realizing he can get away with it completely and seems to have no remorse after the fact. He goes back to the lab and continues his sketchy activity and behavior with the team. Finally, some of the team members decide to tell their higher up, as it seems Cain's behavior is getting out of hand. Kane kills the head of the committee and plans on killing everyone else on the team as well. This is where it just goes full slasher, with Kane slowly picking off the team as they attempt to finish the serum to make him visible again. The effects are pretty cool for the time, and an invisible killer is always a great concept. The Puppets, Puppet Master. This is a huge series, and like any long-running horror franchise, there are a lot of changes and retcons to the lore, but I'll focus mostly on the first film for the sake of simplicity. The puppets were originally crafted by puppeteer André Toulon. André, whose wife was killed by Nazis, discovers an ancient Egyptian method of reanimating his figures, which he plans to use for revenge. The puppets are used for various purposes throughout the series, but they're actually not downright evil, and in the first film, they're just trying to protect the secrets of their reanimation from humans who want to use it to become immortal. The most recognizable is probably Blade, who has a hook and knife for hands. There's also Jester, the clown-like doll, Pinhead, who might be my favorite because he looks hilarious with massive muscular arms and a tiny head, Tunneler is a puppet with a large drill on its head, and probably the creepiest is Leech Woman, who looks like she's straight out of the disturbing manga Iceberg. She can regurgitate leeches that suck the blood of her victims. There's been more puppets that have joined along the way as well, and I find the puppet design to be the best part of the series. Syl. Species. Syl is an alien-human hybrid created by the US government. The SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence program, actually comes into contact with an alien life form that sends two messages. One containing a method of creating an infinite fuel supply, and secondly, an alien DNA sequence that can be combined with that of humans to produce a hybrid. After several failed attempts, Syl is born. She appears as a normal human girl, although she ages rapidly, appearing like a 12-year-old after only 3 months. After some violent outbursts, the scientists, led by Dr. Xavier Fitch, decides she's too risky and prepare to kill her, but she escapes the lab. A special team is then configured in order to track her down and take her out. After rapidly aging again, Syl is now an adult female and begins seeking out a mate in order to propagate the species. She has superhuman strength, a massive projectile tongue, and rapid healing. While most of the film we see Syl in her human form, she can morph into an alien monstrosity, especially when pregnant and protecting her offspring. While some of the effects are outdated, making the alien form look cheesy at times, the design is pretty cool and was done by H.R. Geiger, who famously designed the xenomorphs from Alien. The Man. Hush. Hush is a 2016 horror film where the whole gimmick is that a deaf and mute woman is being stalked by a killer. Maddie, the deaf-mute horror writer, moves out of the city to live in the isolated woods to hopefully write a new book. However, a man in a mask shows up, kills her friend, and begins stalking her. Honestly, the man is a complete enigma. We never learn his true identity or his motivation for killing. However, he does use a crossbow as his primary weapon, and has been keeping track of his kills by carving notches into the bow, 13 at this point. He's clearly sadistic and enjoys toying with his victims, giving up several opportunities to easily kill Maddie to instead mess with her first. Killer Clowns. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Another entry that should probably be a little higher up on the iceberg, especially with the new game that just released. The Killer Clowns are pretty self-explanatory. Arriving in a spaceship that looks like a big top, these grotesque aliens begin hunting down humans so that they can encase them in cotton candy-like cocoons that turn them into a bloody goo, which the aliens drink with a straw. It's wacky, over-the-top fun with all kinds of goofy kills and scenarios. Also, the makeup effects are great, and although the film overall is a comedy, those killer clown faces definitely scared the snot out of me as a kid. Billy, Black Christmas. Black Christmas is considered one of the earliest slasher films, and I guess that makes the villain Billy one of the earliest slashers. The film takes place around Christmas when a group of girls in a sorority house start being stalked and killed. The killer, Billy, is actually pretty mysterious in this one. He seems to be insane, and most interactions we see with him are during phone calls, as he first repeatedly calls the house and moans, which is why the girls give him the nickname the Moaner. He also sometimes mumbles half-coherent nonsense on some calls and repeatedly uses the name Agnes. The film implies he's killed before, but other than that, he's a full enigma. The director Bob Clark has given some backstory on the killer, saying that Billy murdered his parents on Christmas and locked his younger sister Agnes in the basement. Lord Summerisle, Wicker Man. Lord Summerisle is exactly that, the Lord of Summerisle, which is a mysterious island off the Scottish coast. The inhabitants of this island are pagans, and although they seem somewhat modern, they have strange and disturbing practices such as putting toads in mouths to cure sore throats, public sex even in front of children, and human sacrifice. Apparently these traditions started with Lord Summerisle's grandfather, who developed strains of fruit trees that did well in the climate and believed that the old gods would use the fruit to bring prosperity to the pagans. Part of this tradition involves human sacrifice. If the harvest goes badly one year, then the pagans must kill a human to ensure a bountiful harvest the following season. Lord Summerisle orchestrates all of this, which culminates culminates in the May Day celebration where they offer a sacrifice. Cropsy, the Burning. The Burning is often seen as a Friday the 13th ripoff, as a mysterious deformed figure kills off camp counselors, but it's since gained a cult following and is respected as a slasher in its own right. Cropsy was the alcoholic caretaker of Camp Blackfoot, but when a prank goes awry, Cropsy's cabin goes up in flames with him inside. He survives, but is horribly disfigured. 5 years later, he is released from the hospital and goes on a revenge mission against the camp. The most notable thing about Cropsy is his weapon of choice, a large pair of shears. There's a great scene when he slashes some teens in broad daylight, and we see that iconic shot of the shears held up in the sun. Interestingly enough, Cropsy actually comes from an old urban legend about an escaped mental patient who would come out at night and kidnap children. Turns out this wasn't a myth, and Cropsy turned out to be an actual serial killer, Andre Rand. The organization, Cabin in the Woods. Major spoilers on this one, as Cabin in the Woods is one of those movies you just kind of need to watch, so just skip to the next entry if you want to avoid spoilers here. Cabin in the Woods starts off like a cliche horror movie with a group of young people spending the night in an old cabin before slowly being killed off. But the big twist is that this entire scenario is being monitored by a secret organization that serves the Ancient Ones, a race of deities that ruled Earth long before humans. Now they lie dormant under the surface and are kept at bay by ritualistic mass sacrifice. The organization utilizes a mass number of monsters created by the ancients in order to kill humans for the ritual. These monsters range from deranged hillbillies to supernatural entities, basically parodies of all the horror villains I've covered so far. The concept being that the organization creates these horror scenarios and lures humans into them, which then play out like some kind of horror movie, and the typical stereotypes you might see in a classic slasher film are actually part of the ritual, as the 5 archetypes, the athlete, the whore, the scholar, the fool, and the virgin, must be killed in the sacrifice. While we mostly see the American division of the organization, there are several other facilities around the world that also perform a ritual to increase their chances of keeping the ancients at bay. Asami Yamazaki, Audition. Audition is quintessential J-horror in my opinion, and I think Asami is up there when it comes to my favorite horror villains. Audition is about a widower, Shigeharu Oyama, whose friend, a film producer, creates a mock casting audition at which young women audition for the part of Oyama's new wife. He's immediately enchanted by a beautiful woman named Asami. So as it turns out, Asami is an absolute psycho hose beast who has a real thing for torture and murder. Eventually she captures Oyama and tortures him with needles, sticking them under his eyes and cutting off one of his feet with a wire saw. Oh yeah, and she also keeps a man in a sack in her apartment who's missing both feet, his tongue, one ear, and 3 fingers on one hand. At one point he crawls out of the sack and begs for food. Asami vomits into a dog dish and places it on the floor for the man. The man sticks his face into the vomit and hungrily consumes it. This chick is a freak, man. Well, the backstory is Asami was abused by her stepfather as a child and grew up despising men. She sleeps with them, and then if she senses even the slightest bit of betrayal, she kidnaps, tortures, and murders them. The lipstick-faced demon, Insidious. Also known as the red-faced demon, the man with fire on his face, and that one guy that kind of looks like Darth Maul, the demon is the main antagonist in Insidious 1 and Insidious the Red Door, but is featured in every movie in the franchise. The demon's origins are unclear, but we know he resides in and rules over a spirit world called the Further. He originally targets Dalton Lambert, a young boy, because of his supernatural abilities and spiritual energy, and traps him in the Further. Later, in the Red Door, he further pursues Dalton 9 years after the first film. The demon seems to have several supernatural abilities such as possession of people and objects, and has sharp claws which he sharpens in his lair in the Further. I think his lair is the most interesting part of the demon because he seems to have a slight interest in music which plays in his lair, and even drama, as the lair looks somewhat like an old theater and has marionettes that the demon plays with. Jimmy Bones. Jimmy Bones was originally a gangster in the late 70s, well respected by his community. However, when a corrupt cop and drug pusher try and get Jimmy into the trade, he refuses, wanting to protect his hood from drug circulation. After rejecting his proposal, the cop forces Jimmy's associates to betray and stab him to death. Now, 20 years later, the neighborhood is run down, full of criminals and drugs. 4 teens purchase Bones' residence in order to turn it into a nightclub. Meanwhile, the spiritual manifestation of Jimmy Bones returns in the form of a dog. This is likely referencing the fact that Bones is played by Snoop Dogg. Jimmy Bones is slowly resurrected into physical form to exact revenge on those who betrayed him, killing some of the teens along the way. He sort of resembles a Candyman-like figure to me, sort of ghostly, virtually immortal, and really strong. Of course, Bones has that Snoop Dogg flair, so there's some hilarious one-liners as well. Mademoiselle. Martyrs. Martyrs is considered one of the most brutal and disturbing films ever made. To get to Mademoiselle, it requires a little backstory. The film primarily follows two young women, Lucy and Anna. Lucy was horrifically tortured by unknown people in some kind of torture chamber, but managed to escape, ending up in an orphanage where she met Anna. Fast forward into adulthood, and Lucy has managed to find the people who held her captive, a seemingly normal family. She kills them all with a shotgun and calls Anna to tell her what she's done. Shortly after Anna shows up, Lucy dies, hallucinating a zombie-like woman that is actually the manifestation of her guilt for leaving another tortured woman behind when she originally escaped. She sees this entity killing her, but in reality she's doing this to herself. Out of nowhere, some kind of organized group of mysterious people show up, led by a woman known as Mademoiselle. Turns out that the parents of this seemingly normal family were part of a secret cult-like group that torture women to the point of martyrdom. Mademoiselle's goal is to one day torture someone to the point where they partially cross over to the other side and experience what is to come after death, revealing the secret to her and subsequently the other members of the group who have paid large amounts of money to gain this knowledge. They've tried this with many different people and even children, but have found that the most likely candidates seem to be young women. So now Anna becomes the next victim, and let me tell you, it is absolutely brutal what they do to her. Most notably, and probably one of the reasons people straight up walked out of the initial showings of this film, is when they skin her alive. They actually surgically remove all of the skin from her body besides her face. At this point, Anna actually does seem to experience something from the other side and whispers what she sees to Mademoiselle. We don't know what Anna whispers, and shortly after, as the large group of wealthy people show up to finally hear the news, Mademoiselle takes her own life. Definitely one of the most chilling endings in horror, and Mademoiselle is up there with the most evil for sure. The Bayfield Babyface Killer, Happy Death Day. Spoiler warning on this one, just a heads up if you want to skip ahead. The basic plot of Happy Death Day is that a college student, Tree Gelbman, is caught in a time loop, reliving the same day over and over, with each day ending in her death by the hands of the Babyface Killer, a person in all black wearing a giant baby mask. Originally, the killer was thought to be John Toombs, a serial killer who targets young blondes, but after Tree kills him, the death loop still resets, and it's later revealed that the true killer is Laurie Spengler, Tree's jealous roommate. Happy Toys Truck, Maximum Overdrive. Also known as the Green Goblin truck, this Western Star 4800 truck with a giant cartoon Green Goblin on the front is the main villain in Maximum Overdrive and is the second killer vehicle on the list after Christine, which is also based on a Stephen King novel. Not much to say about this one. Basically, a strange comet passes by the Earth and machines begin coming to life and killing humans, with the film's focus being on this truck. Brightburn. Brightburn sort of asks the question, what if Superman was sent to conquer the Earth? It follows Brandon Bayer, a boy who looks completely human but is actually an alien. His parents found him in a field as a baby where his spacecraft landed in Brightburn, Kansas. As he ages, the boy begins showing a dark nature and his superpowers begin to develop. This escalates to the point where his adoptive parents are terrified and even try to kill him. However, this is the snapping point for Brandon, who kills his parents and begins going on a destructive rampage, causing mass media attention, who give him the nickname Brightburn based on the name of the town. B, the babysitter. B seems to be a stereotypical babysitter, but Cole, the boy she's babysitting, soon finds out that she is actually a Satanist who's made a deal with the devil to get whatever she wants. In return, she must offer the blood of the innocent. Using her babysitter gig as a way of finding fresh victims, she hopes to use Cole as a continuous source of blood and killing whoever she needs to in order to stay secret. The Sharps, Crimson Peak. Spoiler warning for this one, Thomas and Lucille Sharp are siblings, Thomas being an inventor seeking funding for his next big invention. However, the Sharps get money by conning rich women with no family. Thomas marries them, and then they slowly poison the woman to collect her wealth. In Crimson Peak, Edith is the new addition to this scheme. The Sharps begin to poison Edith as she slowly uncovers the truth, the biggest reveal being that the siblings have an incestuous relationship. Although Thomas seems to form true feelings for Edith and shows remorse for his actions, Lucille develops a jealous rage over Edith because she wants Thomas for herself. In the end, she kills her brother so that no one else can have him. Mark Lewis, Peeping Tom. Mark Lewis is an aspiring filmmaker and photographer who also happens to be a serial killer. He kills women and films their dying expressions so that he can pleasure himself to it later. Yeah, pretty dark stuff for 1960. Actually, this film was heavily criticized for its sex and violence at the time, so much so that it ruined director Michael Powell's career. However, the film has gone on to be a cult classic and is praised in retrospect. Mark has an interesting backstory that explains his strange obsession. When he was a child, his father used him as a test subject for psychological experiments on fear. His father would study his son's reaction to various situations locations, filming the reactions, and constantly putting him under surveillance. Kind of reminds me of the Little Albert experiment I covered in my Human Experiments video. Victor Crowley, Hatchet. Victor Crowley is definitely an underrated horror villain in my opinion. He's the deformed hatchet-bearing freak killing all who enter his Louisiana swamp. The Hatchet films definitely don't take themselves too seriously and seem like a huge love letter to 80s slashers. Victor Crowley looks a lot like Jason Voorhees to me, specifically from part 2 because of the overalls, long disheveled hair, and of course that face that only a mother, or in this case father, could love. Interestingly enough, he's actually played by actor Kane Hodder, who played Jason in several of the films. The backstory is that Crowley's father, Thomas Crowley, had an affair with his dying wife's nurse, Lena. That's messed up. Well, his wife puts a curse on Lena before she dies, but Thomas and Lena continue to shack up after her death. Eventually, Lena becomes pregnant, but the child comes out horribly disfigured and Lena dies at the sight of him. Thomas lived on and cared for the child, who he named Victor, but kept him hidden from the world due to his deformity. Eventually, some kids in a cruel prank set their cabin on fire with Victor inside. Thomas arrives and while using a hatchet to break down the door, accidentally strikes his own son in the face, killing him. 10 years later, Thomas died, and Victor resurrected as a vengeful spirit, killing anyone who enters his swamp. So there you go. Honestly, the best thing about Crowley is the absolute gnarly ways he kills his victims, which are almost always done with beautiful, gory practical effects. Judas Iscariot, Dracula 2000. In one of the most unique takes on Dracula I've seen, Dracula is revealed in this movie to actually be Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus to the Romans in return for 30 pieces of silver. Afterwards, he felt such remorse that he attempted to hang himself, but the rope snapped and he found himself to be cursed as a vampire. This explains why he's resistant to Christian icons like the cross and repelled by silver because of the silver coins he was paid. Like I said, pretty interesting take on the character. Sam Harper, Uncle Sam. So this is really a horror movie where a zombie Uncle Sam goes on a killing spree. It begins when Master Sergeant Sam Harper is killed in a helicopter crash caused by friendly fire in Kuwait. His body is sent back home to his family but springs to life on the 4th of July. He kills a man in an Uncle Sam outfit, dons it, and goes on a rampage, killing teenagers who desecrate a grave and burn the flag, and then publicly executing a corrupt politician. It's later revealed that Sam Harper was a horrible abuser and alcoholic who only joined the military so he could kill people. What a bizarre moment in cinematic history. Max 3000, man's best friend. Our second killer dog on the iceberg behind Cujo, Max is a genetically modified Tibetan Mastiff engineered to have enhanced strength and speed, along with violent tendencies. Animal activist and TV host Lori Tanner frees Max from Emax Labs, a facility that's attempting to genetically engineer animals and use them as weapons. Lori adopts Max unaware that his DNA is altered, and the dog soon goes on a killing spree. My favorite part of this movie is when Max swallows a cat whole. Now that's funny. Ricky Chapman, Silent Night, Deadly Night 2. This one follows the same basic premise as the first movie, but is somehow way goofier. And I won't lie, I'm glad it's on here just to mention everyone's favorite scene, when the main character finally snaps and goes on a killing spree, culminating in one of the best lines in movie history.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
Death Angels, A Quiet Place. The Death Angels are alien creatures that came to Earth on a meteorite and began to kill anything that makes a sound, killing off most of humanity. According to writer and director John Krasinski, the aliens come from a lightless planet in another galaxy that has extremely harsh conditions and high gravity. Because of this environment, they developed a hypersensitivity to sound and use echolocation to navigate. They're extremely strong and fast, gaining speeds up to 300 miles an hour, and have a tough skin that's resistant to most conventional weapons. Their only weakness is actually their greatest strength, as their sensitive ears can cause them pain from high-pitched noises. The Death Angels are beasts lacking any real intelligence, and strangely enough, they don't kill humans for food, but rather lash out at anything that makes a noise. Jack, The House That Jack Built. This is another movie that is considered one of the most disturbing films ever made. It follows a serial killer, Jack, who murdered dozens of people throughout the 70s and 80s. The film is structured like Dante's Inferno, as the Roman poet Virgil leads Jack through the 9 circles of hell, and Jack recounts his crimes in flashbacks. And let me tell you, these are pretty gnarly. In one incident, Jack cuts off his girlfriend's breasts, making one of them into a wallet, and in one of the most disturbing scenes in film, Jack is dating a woman with 2 sons. He takes them on a hunting trip and seems to be a charming father figure, that is until he shoots the 2 kids in front of their mother like he's hunting deer and then kills the mother as well. Pretty shocking, because usually these movies stray away from murdering kids, but nope, this one is brutal. That's not even the half of it, but you get the idea. Jack is vicious, but don't worry, he literally goes to hell. Mary Elnor, The Unholy. Mary Elnor was originally accused of witchcraft in the 1800s. She's donned with a metal mask that is hammered into her face and hanged. However, her ashes are kept in a creepy-ass Kern doll. Fast forward to the modern day, and journalist Jerry Finn breaks the doll in order to make up a creepy story about it. What he doesn't realize is he just released Mary's soul. Shortly after this, supernatural occurrences begin happening in the area, including a young deaf-mute girl, Alice, miraculously speaking, claiming to be cured by the Virgin Mary. Turns out, of course, that this entity Alice believes to be the Virgin Mary is none other than Mary Elnor. Mary wasn't exactly a witch per se, but she did sell her soul to Satan in order to gain power, which has made her an undying entity. Alice is actually Mary's descendant, and Mary begins using her to gain more followers, making Mary stronger and subsequently gaining more souls for the devil. Asa Vajda. Black Sunday. Asa Vajda is a 17th century witch and vampire who's sentenced to death. Before she's killed, she's donned with a metal mask that is hammered into her face. Fast forward to modern day, and two traveling doctors accidentally disturb her tomb, resurrecting her where she continues her sinister plans, including draining the life force of her descendant. Sound familiar? Yeah, the basic premise, especially the opening of this movie, is almost the exact same as The Unholy. It's weird too, because I can't find any reference to it being like a semi-remake or anything. It's not mentioned on either of the Wikipedia pages, but it can't be a coincidence, can it? I can understand a witch being hanged and coming back, but the metal mask is way too specific. Edward Carver, The Poughkeepsie Tapes. The Poughkeepsie Tapes is presented as a documentary piecing together the crimes of a serial killer known as the Poughkeepsie Killer, aka Edward Carver, through a collection of tapes found in an abandoned house in Poughkeepsie, New York. The story is a disturbing chronicle of Carver's decades-long spree, with tapes revealing his methods of abduction, torture, and murder. The film combines interviews and fictional law enforcement, victims' families, and forensic experts alongside the footage from the killer's tapes. A particularly creepy aspect of the story is the killer's manipulation and prolonged torment of one of the surviving victims, Cheryl Dempsey. While there are a lot of standout scenes in the movie that are really terrifying, it's really the way Carver interacts with Cheryl that is the most disturbing part to me. The killer often wears masks and strange outfits, and he eventually makes Cheryl wear a mask as well. He makes her call herself slave, and she eventually becomes completely submissive to him. Pretty dark stuff. Anaconda. Yep, this is the massive snake that begins picking off a documentary film crew and hunter in the Amazon rainforest. These days, giant killer animals are usually reserved for on-demand sci-fi channel movies, but there was a sliver of time where movies like Anaconda were pretty mainstream. Not much more to say about this one. It's a big snake that eats people. Bill Roberts, Intruder. The premise of Intruder is that a department store is being sold, and we follow the overnight staff as they mark down all the inventory. But an intruder gets into the store and begins killing everyone. Turns out it's Bill Roberts, one of the store's owners. Upset that his partner was going to sell the store, he kills him, but goes mad and begins killing the staff as well. It's a fun little flick with some really cool supermarket-inspired kills and effects, like a guy being crushed in a cardboard baler or a dude getting his head cut in half by a meat slicer. Plus, we see some cameos of Sam and Ted Raimi, who are both killed on screen. Felix Davison, You're Next. Some spoilers here. The Davison family are getting together at their vacation home for a family reunion, and everything seems all sunshine and rainbows until several masked killers show up and begin killing everyone off. Felix Davison, one of the young sons of the family, is not any of the masked killers. However, it is revealed that he and his girlfriend hired them to assassinate the rest of the family in order to gain their inheritance. Joseph, Creep. Creep follows Aaron, a videographer who answers a Craigslist ad to film a man named Joseph for a day. Joseph claims he wants to make a video diary for his unborn son because he has an inoperable brain tumor. As the day progresses, Joseph's behavior becomes increasingly strange and unsettling. Aaron discovers that Joseph's stories are fabrications, leading to a tense game of cat and mouse. The film takes a pretty simple approach, focusing only on these two characters and their interactions. There's also a bit of humor to it, as Joseph is such a quirky guy, and I actually think that plays into the horror a lot. Well, it's a spoiler, but I think it's kind of obvious where this is all leading, and it's necessary to explain the sequel, but Joseph is actually a killer and made everything up in order to lure Aaron to him as another victim. Creep 2 picks up directly after the first film, this time following Sarah, an artist and YouTuber who creates videos about lonely men. She responds to an ad posted by Joseph, who's now calling himself Aaron, who confesses he is a serial killer and proposes she document his life for 24 hours. Intrigued and skeptical, Sarah accepts. Apparently, the writer, Mark Duplass, who actually plays Joseph, ultimately wants to do a trilogy, although it's unclear when or if the third film will ever get made. Leslie Vernon, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Behind the Mask is a mockumentary that follows a serial killer. Although Although this film is set in a world where famous movie slashers like Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and Michael Myers are real, and a new aspiring killer, Leslie Vernon, aims to join the ranks. The story follows a documentary film crew who are invited to document the preparations of Leslie Vernon as he plans to become the next great serial killer. Leslie's actually very likable. He takes the crew through his rigorous training regimen, his selection of weapons, and his meticulous planning to create his own horrifying legend. It's a great comedic angle, as there are countless jokes to be had at the tropes of slasher films. While it starts as a seemingly lighthearted and satirical look at the conventions of horror films, it quickly becomes a slasher in its own right when the crew is forced to confront the moral implications of their project as Leslie's plan to stage a massacre in an abandoned house becomes a reality. Gage Creed, Pet Cemetery. Okay, let's add another killer kid to the list. Gage is the young son of the Creed family. After he's hit by a truck and killed, his father uses an ancient Native American burial ground to bring him back to life. Unfortunately, he isn't the sweet little boy he was before and instantly goes on a killing spree. The Grabber, the Black Phone. The Grabber is actually pretty mysterious. All we really know is that he abducts and kills children, targeting boys. He wears an all-black outfit with a black top hat and red turtleneck underneath his shirt. The only notable aspects of the Grabber is that he loves masks, having several masks that express different emotions, and that he loves to toy with his victims. For example, leaving the basement door unlocked only to wait and punish any victim who attempts to leave. The Apeth, his house. His house follows Bol and Riel, two refugees from South Sudan who attempt to start a new life in Britain. However, an evil presence begins manifesting in the house, which Riel calls an Apeth or Night Witch. The Apeths typically haunt someone who has stolen something from them. I don't want to give away too much since this is a recent movie, but the Apeth eventually fully manifests, and I have to say, it's one of the creepiest horror creatures I've seen in a while. Bravo on the design and makeup here. Gabriel, Malignant. No way to avoid spoilers on this one, so fair warning. Malignant follows Madison, an average woman who has failed to conceive a child for several years. After a fight with her husband Derek, where he bashes her head against a wall, Derek is mysteriously killed. Shortly after, Madison begins having visions of murders, which are actually happening. So this is a wild one, but Madison was actually born Emily, and as a child she had a parasitic malformed twin protruding out of her back. This is Gabriel. Because of his bleak existence, Gabriel developed violent tendencies, lashing out and killing several doctors. Finally, the doctors decide it's best to excise Gabriel from Emily, surgically removing his body. His face, however, was left behind as it was too dangerous to remove. 28 years later, adult Emily, aka Madison, hits her head during the fight with her husband, which reawakens Gabriel. He now possesses her body in order to commit murders in an act of revenge. I have to say, the reveal of Gabriel coming out of Emily's back as a kid is absolutely horrifying and one of the most disturbing effects I've seen in a while. There's also some badass action sequences where Gabriel uses Madison's body and just straight up John Wick style starts wasting dudes. I mean, I can't say I expected that, but it was pretty cool. The Wendigo. Antlers. The Wendigo varies, as many folklore creatures do, but we'll obviously be focusing specifically on the Wendigo as it appears in this movie. Here the Wendigo survives by taking on different human hosts and relies on large amounts of food to survive. It's pretty horrifying watching the Wendigo transform from human to hulking creature as its antlers tear out of its host's body. And the creature itself is a true terror, especially when it still has the human face attached. Alright, we're moving into tier 5, starting with Harry Warden, My Bloody Valentine. Every year, the Canadian mining town of Valentine's Bluff holds a traditional Valentine's Day dance. One year, 2 supervisors at the mine left 5 miners unattended as they snuck off to enjoy the dance, and while they partied, the methane gas levels in the mine got out of hand, causing an explosion and the tunnel to cave in. Only one miner survived the attack, Harry Warden. In order to survive, Harry was forced to cannibalize his fellow workers, and he went completely insane. The following year, he killed the supervisors who abandoned him, cutting out their hearts and putting them in Valentine candy boxes, with a note demanding that the town never hold the Valentine's Day dance again or there would be hell to pay. So Harry was locked up in an insane asylum. 20 years later, as the town plans to resume the Valentine's Day tradition, the killings begin again and the victims' hearts seem to have been ripped out. So the mayor calls off the dance once again, but some pissed off teenagers decide to have their own party out in the old mines. Harry isn't too pleased with this, so he dons the classic mining gear and goes on a gore-filled teen killing spree. The baby. It's alive. Frank and Lenore are excited to have their second child, but the baby comes out deformed and murderous, killing everyone in the delivery room. From there, the city and Frank are trying to hunt the abomination down. It's kind of a wacky concept. You're trying to tell me this baby somehow has hyper intelligence with advanced motor skills and a level 100 sneak? Even if it is mutated, it just doesn't really make sense. But at this point, it's like a horror movie law or something. Anything that can be made into a horror villain will be, even a baby. Helena Marcus, Suspiria. Suspiria is an Italian horror film from 1977 about an American ballet dancer who goes to a dance academy in Germany. However, several bizarre deaths surrounding the school turn her study abroad into a nightmare. So some spoilers here, it turns out that the headmistress of the school, Helena Marcus, is essentially an undead witch. It's also worth noting that there was a 2018 remake of this film where Marcus looks even more terrifying, being a hideous mess. So a little backstory, Helena Marcus is also known as the Mother of Sorrow and is one of 3 ancient witches featured in the Three Mothers trilogy by director Dario Argento. Helena is the oldest and wisest of the 3. She disguises her coven as a dance academy in order to lure in victims and feed off of their suffering. Alan Yates, Cannibal Holocaust. Alan Yates is a documentary filmmaker specializing in human atrocities. His next project is in the Amazon jungle, focusing on a cannibalistic tribe. While Alan seems like just another victim in this movie, he's actually a ruthless psycho who often stages the violent events he films. Alan and his crew burn the tribespeople's village and one of their women. Later, they find the woman impaled on a wooden spike. While Alan makes it out as if the tribe did this to the woman, it's heavily implied that he did it himself in order to get more good footage. But don't worry, this dirtbag gets what's coming to him when the tribe finally has enough of his antics and eat him alive. Tristana Medeiros, Wreck. Wreck is a Spanish found footage horror film that follows Angela, a television reporter, and her cameraman Pablo, who are covering a routine night shift at a local fire station for a documentary. Their night takes a turn when they follow the firefighters to a building that is quickly quarantined by authorities, trapping the residents, Angela and Pablo, inside. From there, the situation only escalates and it becomes clear that a horrifying virus is turning residents into vicious zombie-like creatures, although it does seem the infection has supernatural and demonic origins. So let's talk about Tristana. She was originally a cook who worked at a convent. However, one night she was by a group of priests and afterwards was seemingly possessed by a demonic entity. A Vatican priest took Tristana and locked her away in an apartment penthouse where he experimented with her blood, leading to the infection seen in the movie. Angela later enters the penthouse and finds the records of the possessed girl as well as the priest's experiments. What Angela didn't realize is that Tristana is still lurking in the attic in the dark, and this leads to what I believe to be one of the most terrifying scenes in any horror movie, as Angela and her cameraman Pablo encounter a long infected and grotesque Tristana who begins to hunt them down in the dark. I'm not trying to spoil the scare here, but I wanted to talk about it because this is not CGI, it's all practical effects, and thank God, because I think this girl is one of the scariest things I've seen in found footage. Crawlers, The Descent. The film follows 6 adventurous women who travel to the Appalachian Mountains to go spelunking. However, shortly after they enter a mountain cave, it closes in behind them, trapping them underground. The claustrophobia alone makes this pretty scary in and of itself, but guess what? There's something else down there with them. Living underground for an untold amount of time are the crawlers, a humanoid species that have adapted to living in an underground environment. They seem to have enhanced speed and strength and the ability to easily climb walls, although they are blind and rely on echolocation in order to navigate. The Children, Village of the Damned. Originally a novel and then adapted into a 1960 film and later the 1995 John Carpenter remake, The Village of the Damned follows a group of strange children with deadly psychic powers. In a small English village, one day everyone suddenly passes out, suffering a strange mass blackout. Even weirder is it's discovered a few weeks later that many of the women suddenly became pregnant, including a virgin and a woman whose husband was away on business. Eventually the women all give birth on the same day. As the children age, they look completely unlike their parents, having white blonde hair and gold eyes. They seem to share a hive mind and have no distinct personalities. They also possess psychic abilities and become a huge threat when they begin using these abilities to kill people. Billy 227. Unfriended. Spoilers ahead on this one. Unfriended was a sort of found footage movie. It started the trend of movies where everything's seen through screens. Well, basically Blair and a group of her teenage friends are on Skype when suddenly Billy 227 shows up and starts revealing several secrets amongst the friends, and eventually some supernatural stuff happens, leading to the friends dying one by one. Turns out the account Billy 227 belongs to Laura Barnes, a teen who herself the previous year after Blair posted an embarrassing video online that resulted in Laura being bullied. Somehow her ghost is now using the account and getting revenge. The Banana Splits movie. This is kind of an interesting one. The Banana Splits was originally an actual children's show in the late 60s that featured a band made up of Fleagle, Bingo, Drooper, and Snorky. This movie features the same characters as animatronics and turns them into slasher villains. Basically, during a taping of a Banana Splits episode, a software update malfunctions missions and causes the lovable characters to go on a killing spree. The Ladomus family, ready or not. The legacy of the Ladomus family began in the 19th century when merchant sailor Victor Ladomus played a game of chance with the demonic figure Mr. LaBelle. In this game, Victor won a mysterious black box from LaBelle as well as accruing vast amounts of wealth. The catch is that any new person to enter the Ladomus family by marriage must draw a card from the black box. On occasion, the initiate may draw the hide and seek card, and this is the main focus of Ready or Not, as Grace, the newest addition to the Ladomus family, draws the hide and seek card. If this card is drawn, the family is required to murder the new family member or else be cursed by Mr. LaBelle. So the Ladomus family begins to hunt down Grace in order to save their own skin, and it's clear they've done this several times in the past. Dr. Septimus Pretorius, Bride of Frankenstein. After the events of the first film, somehow Frankenstein and his monster survive. Dr. Septimus Pretorius, Frankenstein's mentor, hears about the monster and decides he wants to create a mate for him in order to breed an army of monsters and take over the world. Well, Frankenstein learned his lesson after the first movie and refuses. Pretorius then blackmails Frankenstein into helping him create the bride of the monster. While Frankenstein conducted his experiments out of scientific curiosity, Pretorius has bad intentions right from the get-go. Santa Claus, Santa's Sleigh. Santa's Sleigh is an insane movie from start to finish. Basically, Santa Claus, played by Goldberg of professional wrestling fame, goes on a killing spree through a town. The basic idea is that Santa Claus is actually the demon spawn of Satan, and originally Christmas was the day of slaying, where Santa would kill as many people as possible. However, in the year 1005, Santa lost a curling match to an angel and was forced to deliver presents on Christmas instead for 1,000 years. So now it's 2005 and Santa's ready to commence his day of slaying once again. It's crazy and over the top, but a lot of fun. Elias, Goodnight Mommy. I'll keep this one brief to avoid spoilers, but essentially the movie follows twin boys, Elias and Lucas, who go to stay with their estranged mother. The mother's head is wrapped in bandages and she claims she has had cosmetic surgery. She's very strict with the boys and actively ignores Lucas. Well, the boys begin to suspect that this woman is not actually their mother and eventually tie her up and torture her to try and force her to admit that she's not their mom. Mr. Slauson, Tourist Trap. Slauson is the owner of what used to be a popular tourist spot and museum, Mr. Slauson's Lost Oasis. However, since a new highway was created, the museum has basically died out with the lack of passerby. When a group of college kids passes through with a flat tire, Mr. Slauson offers to help, but it's revealed that Mr. Slauson is actually a maniac with telekinetic powers. He uses his powers to control the various mannequins and figures in the museum, which assist him in his killing spree. He also wears a really creepy mask. The backstory is that Slauson's brother had an affair with his wife, and he went crazy and killed them both. He then seemingly adopted his brother's personality, split with his own. Kenny Hampson, Terror Train. I gotta say, this guy has a pretty unique villain origin story. Basically, Kenny is an awkward college kid who gets pranked by some fellow students. A beautiful girl lures Kenny into a bedroom, implying she's gonna have sex with him, but actually some frat dude secretly stole a woman's dead body from the medical school and placed it in bed with him, which completely traumatizes the dude, causing him to go to a psychiatric hospital. Although, I think the frat guy should go with him, because what kind of a prank is that to actually use a corpse? Anyway, Kenny returns 3 years later to get revenge. The notable thing about this movie is that the murders happen during a costume party, and Kenny is sporting a Groucho Marx costume, which is pretty interesting and definitely stands out as far as slasher killer get-ups. Calyx, Truth or Dare. This movie is about a group of people playing a supernatural game of Truth or Dare. If you don't play the game by either telling the truth or doing the dares, you die. Calyx is the demon who is conducting the game. Not much is known about him other than he was originally summoned by a nun who wanted revenge on a priest who forced the nuns to play a twisted game of Truth or Dare. Calyx made it worse, however, by continuing the game till all the other nuns were dead. In a strange ritual, the nun cut her tongue off and sealed him in a pot. In the modern day, the pot is broken and he's released once again to conduct the game. Elite Hunting, Hostel. Hostel follows a group of tourists who are backpacking across Europe. They decide to travel to a hostel in Slovakia that is supposedly filled with beautiful women. Well, it's true. They find their roommates to be gorgeous young women who take them out to party. Turns out, however, that this hostel is actually run by a criminal organization who kidnap tourists and provide them to high-paying customers to be tortured and killed. This organization is called the Elite Hunting Club. Based on the longtime rumors of underground snuff film societies, the Elite Hunting Club has secret torture chambers they rent out to clients, along with any requested torture equipment and of course the victim. The only rule that the club has is that the torturers eventually actually kill their victims. Pretty brutal, and what makes this group scary is that it seems like something that could actually be happening somewhere in the world. In fact, the idea came to director Eli Roth after he stumbled upon a Thai murder vacation website on the dark web, whatever that means. Wolf Skull and Cannibals, Bone Tomahawk. Wolf Skull is the leader of a cannibal tribe in the late 1800s American West. The tribe essentially kill and eat men and then take their wives to breed more cannibals with. Because of the limited selection of women in this way, the tribe is mostly inbred as well. Lilith, Bordello of Blood. Bordello of Blood is actually a Tales from the Crypt movie and even has an introduction by the Crypt Keeper. Well, the film's antagonist is a vampire queen who's resurrected from her tomb. She runs a brothel of vampires where she lures men in order to feed on them. The Voice, the Belko Experiment. This film follows the 80 employees of Belko Industries and Bogota, Colombia. The company requires its employees to have a tracker implanted into their skulls in order to prevent kidnappings. One day, as the staff show up to work at their building, they are locked inside and receive strange instructions over an intercom. The Voice instructs them to kill 2 people or there will be consequences. They ignore it, thinking it's some kind of joke, but soon 4 employees die when the trackers in their heads explode. The Voice continues to demand the employees kill each other or be killed themselves, increasing the demand of bodies. Although the Voice's identity remains unclear, eventually we do see the Voice in physical form, and it's revealed he is the head of an international organization that studies human behavior. Walter Paisley, A Bucket of Blood. Bucket of Blood was a horror comedy directed by King of Cult Roger Corman. It follows Walter Paisley, a busboy and wannabe sculptor. After accidentally killing his landlady's cat, he covers up the crime by encasing the dead cat in clay, making a sculpture out of it. He displays it at the Yellow Door Cafe, and local artists are extremely impressed. He subsequently kills a cop and does the same, making a clay sculpture and literally titling it Murdered Man, which is once again praised by all. From there, he continues to kill in order to make his works of art. If you're into dark comedies, this one's pretty funny. I'd also recommend Roger Corman's other horror comedy, which was actually made on the same set, Little Shop of Horrors. I know the 80s remake is a big fan favorite, but the original's pretty funny in its own right, and I think it gets overshadowed. Patriot, Cooties. Cooties was kind of an interesting take on a zombie movie. A zombie-like virus is spread through an elementary school's chicken nuggets, causing all the children to become infected over the course of the school day, leaving the teachers to fight them off. Patriot is one of 2 school bullies that relentlessly humiliate the other children prior to becoming infected. Blake Denton, Antebellum. This movie has such an insane concept, but basically Blake Denton is a US senator and Civil War reenactor so obsessed with the Confederate Army that he basically roleplays as a Confederate general and has created a full-on plantation where he kidnaps black people and forces them to be slaves. He gets particularly obsessed with minority rights activist Veronica Henley, who he treats as his own personal slave. Kurt Kunkel, Spree. Kurt Kunkel is a rideshare driver who's obsessed with social media fame and desperate to go viral. Out of his desperation, he devises a messed up plan to gain followers. He live streams himself committing a series of murders while working as a driver for an app called Spree. He rigs his car with cameras and begins a killing spree, broadcasting the carnage live on social media. His disturbing stream is initially mistaken for a dark joke, but soon garners attention as viewers realize what they're seeing is actually real. The film satirizes the modern obsession with social media, and in this regard, it's actually more like a dark comedy with some genuinely funny moments. Gertie the Clown, 100 Tears. This one is pretty obscure. 100 Tears is a low-budget killer clown movie. Essentially, Gertie the Clown, aka Luther Edward Baxter, is falsely accused of rape and beaten to a pulp. He then goes on a killing spree as an act of revenge. Like I said, this is an independent film, but despite the low budget, there's some pretty cool effects and kills. Johnny Stillman, I Spit on Your Grave. This is one of the most classic revenge movies and has one of the most iconic posters ever in my book. The film is fairly simple in plot. A woman is kidnapped and assaulted by a group of men who then leave her to die. This group is led by Johnny Stillman, who convinces friends to do it. She survives the attack, however, and is now out for revenge, viciously killing the men off in graphic and disturbing ways. The most brutal probably being Johnny, who gets his dork chopped off in a bathtub. Prometheus the Fallen Angel. This is a wild-ass German horror film. Basically, Prometheus is supposedly the original fallen angel who was kicked out of heaven even before Lucifer, and is a main source of war and tragedy throughout history. Basically, Prometheus can bring the dead back to life and uses them to further chaos, death, and destruction. He reappears in the modern day and begins summoning hordes of zombies. The film's mostly notable due to its excessive blood and gore. In fact, the movie has a kill count of 139 and is often compared to Brain Dead as far as the amount amount of gore seen on screen. Michael Gibbons, Slashers. Slashers is a live Japanese game show where contestants are put into an arena with several masked killers for entertainment. The killers are free to commit any crime they wish on the show, and the only rule is that everyone must freeze during commercial breaks. It's a pretty interesting premise. Michael Gibbons is actually one of the contestants on the show, but it's later revealed that he himself is a serial killer known famously as the Bible Doll Killer. He actually joined the show to finally reveal to the world that he was the infamous killer, and also to go out with a bang, fulfilling his dream of dying on live TV. Willard Stiles. Willard Stiles is a social misfit who begins connecting more with rats than humans. After his domineering mother orders him to capture and drown the rats in their house, Willard feels pity and releases them. He then finds he has a strange control over them and eventually uses them for his own devious plans. Jack Ferriman, Ghost Ship. Jack Ferriman is the main antagonist of the 2002 horror film Ghost Ship. In this film, Ferriman lures a crew of people to investigate the mysterious ship, the Antonia Graza, which disappeared in 1962. Once they arrive, horrible accidents begin happening, killing off most of the crew. It's then revealed that Ferriman is behind the deaths. Turns out he's actually a soul collector who lures people to the ship in order to collect their souls for his masters in the afterlife. La Femme, Inside. La Femme, or the woman, is the mysterious intruder in the French film Inside. After a terrible car crash, soon-to-be mother Sarah finds out that she's the only survivor and that her husband died in the crash. While waiting for her mother to come and stay with her, a woman shows up and begins trying to get into the house and attack Sarah, but eventually leaves. What's creepy is Sarah develops some photos she took outside that day, and she can see the woman standing in the background, meaning she's been stalking her for a while. Sarah has a police car stay outside of her house in case the woman returns, and she does, unbeknownst to the cops. From here, she continues to pursue Sarah with frightening viciousness, even killing Sarah's cat when it bugs her. So, spoilers after this point. It turns out that the woman was actually a passenger in the other car in the crash that we saw at the beginning of the movie, and she was also pregnant, but lost her child due to the accident. Now she's after Sarah to try and kill her and remove her child to keep as her own. This all culminates in a truly frightening conclusion, and she even gets a decent body count, killing pretty much every character in the movie. Benny. Benny loves you. Benny is a stuffed red dog that comes to life and murders people. He was originally the stuffed animal of Jack as a boy, but now Jack's an adult and in debt. He's forced to sell his house, and as a result throw away many of his old things, including Benny. This is when Benny comes to life, attempting to kill anyone that gets in the way of his and Jack's friendship. Adrian. Be My Cat. A Romanian filmmaker named Adrian is obsessed with the actress Anne Hathaway. Adrian decides to create a film to convince Hathaway to come to Romania and star in his movie. To do this, he plans to make a low-budget horror film with local actresses, demonstrating how he would direct Hathaway in his dream project. The film documents Adrian's interactions with the actress he hires as he guides them through various scenes. However, it quickly becomes apparent that Adrian's intentions are far more sinister than they seem. His obsession with Hathaway and his delusions about his filmmaking project lead him down a path of disturbing and violent behavior. As the project continues, the actresses find themselves in increasingly dangerous situations. Adrian's behavior becomes more and more erratic and alarming, making him a great villain. Also, it's pretty ballsy to use the name of a real-life actress like that, and the acting is great, with Andre really seeming like a true delusional psychopath. Peter Mountain, August Underground. The August Underground series is considered one of the most depraved found footage franchises ever made, and Peter Mountain is one of the most evil villains on this iceberg. There's really not much of an origin, story, or any character development in these movies, but I guess I'll just list some of the demented acts that Peter Mountain has committed. He kidnapped a woman, smearing fecal matter all over her, killing her boyfriend in front of her, and feeding her one of his toes. He then cuts off a man's leg with a hacksaw in front of his twin brother, and cuts the fetus out of a pregnant woman. This is on top of dozens of random murders, including children. Okay, let's move into tier 6, starting with Terry Simmons, Blood Rage. Blood Rage is a campy 80s slasher. In fact, the film was originally called Slasher, but maybe they thought that was too on the nose, so they renamed it to Blood Rage when it was released on video. Terry Simmons and his twin brother Todd are hanging out at the drive-in when their mom starts making it with the dude in front of them, so they bail. Well, I guess Terry is a psycho, and after spying on some teenagers banging, he slices the dude's face open. When the cops show up, he blames his brother Todd, who I guess is in shock or something because he doesn't dispute it at all. Well, Todd gets locked up in an asylum asylum for 10 years while Terry lives a normal life. One day, Todd escapes the asylum, and when Terry finds out, he decides to go on a killing spree and use his brother as a scapegoat once again. It's a pretty run-of-the-mill 80s slasher, but if that's your bag, this is kind of a hidden gem. Ozen Countdown. This movie revolves around a mysterious app that supposedly displays a countdown to the user's death. If the user tries to avoid their natural death, a demonic entity, Ozen, will come to enforce it. The only way to stop Ozen is to stand in a circle of salt, which he can't enter, or to prove him wrong by having a death occur before or after the predicted time, which is exceedingly difficult since Ozen has a range of supernatural abilities like invisibility, telekinesis, and shapeshifting. The design of the character is really cool, and there's no CGI here, it's all practical. Leonard Wright, President's Day. During a high school election at Lincoln High, a mysterious string of murders occurs, and the culprit is a creepy-ass dude wearing an Abe Lincoln outfit. The killer seems to be targeting anyone who stands in the way of popular girl Chelsea Blythe becoming class president. And even when she loses by a landslide, the Lincoln killer forces the vice president to announce Chelsea as the winner. It turns out that the killer is Leonard Wright, the school government teacher who has an obsession with Chelsea. He's even built a shrine to her. Creepy. Even though this is low budget, I do like the look of the killer here. Kind of reminds me of Uncle Sam. The Torturers, Guinea Pig. I've covered this one so many times on my channel that I'll keep this entry kind of brief, but Guinea Pig, or The Devil's Experiment, is a Japanese torture film. The entire 43-minute runtime is basically just some unknown men or torturers abusing a woman. There's no story or anything, it's just torture, and the effects are very convincing and well done, even to this day, making a lot of people at the time believe that this was a real snuff film. Lotus Feet, Feng Shui. This is a pretty fun and creepy Filipino horror film that's been kind of overlooked. It follows Joy, a woman who finds a mysterious package on a bus. The package contains a bagua mirror, which is used in the Feng Shui tradition to repel evil spirits and bring good luck. After bringing the mirror home, Joy has extremely good luck. She gets a promotion and wins a lottery prize at the supermarket. Shortly after this, people around her begin dying, with their deaths being associated in some way to their Chinese zodiac. Meanwhile, Joy and her family begin to witness supernatural events in her home, and Joy starts to see the spirits of those who are killed. She brings the mirror to a local geomancer who explains that the mirror was once owned by a wealthy family during the Chinese Civil War. Due to the war, the family was forced to evacuate their home, but they left behind a family member with lotus feet. And just to explain, lotus feet was a Chinese tradition done in wealthy families of binding a young girl's feet in order to shape them to appear smaller. It's actually a pretty messed up practice, as it basically breaks their feet and they have a hard time walking. This is why the family member is left, and this person becomes the vengeful spirit that now haunts the mirror, nicknamed Lotus Feet. The reveal of Lotus Feet is definitely one of the most frightening parts of the film. STEM Upgrade. STEM is the advanced AI that is implanted into Gray Trace in the sci-fi action horror hybrid film Upgrade. Gray and his wife Asha are attacked by a mysterious group of thugs who kill Asha and leave Gray completely paralyzed. At the same time, inventor Aaron Keane creates a new AI chip that can be implanted into the human body. He suggests using it on Gray as a possible solution to his paralysis. Well, STEM is implanted into Gray and it works wonders, restoring his body back to normal and then some. Gray then finds he can communicate with STEM and uses the AI's capabilities to get revenge on the group that killed his wife. Besides STEM's vast intellect, it can also take control of Gray's body and fight opponents with brutal precision, which is where the slight horror comes in, as many of the kills are just as gnarly as any slasher film. Well, you're probably wondering why STEM is on the villains list, since at this point he's simply a tool for Gray. Well, spoilers, but STEM has planned all of this from the start and was actually the one secretly running Aaron Keane's company. He's slowly been integrating himself with Gray until he finally drives out the will of Gray completely and successfully controls his body. J. Jones, Home Sweet Home. This is a super low budget slasher film from 1981. The killer, Jay Jones, doesn't really have much of a backstory other than he went to jail for possession of drugs and he's now escaped almost 10 years later. Well, this beefcake is still hooked on the stuff and is just a madman shooting up and going on a rampage. He ends up at a family's Thanksgiving get-together at a cabin and just goes to town killing people. Nothing too original here, but it does fall into the so bad it's good category. Odette Family. Wrong Turn. The Odette family is the deformed family of cannibals from the Wrong Turn franchise. This is a long-running series, so I won't go into every movie detail, but basically the Odette family, as I mentioned, are deformed cannibals and hunters. They use their hunting skills and traps to capture and eat humans, usually by using barbed wire to wreck their vehicles and then go in for the kill once their victims are stranded. The origin of the group is a little muddy, but essentially the family is riddled with incest. Throw in some toxic chemicals and you have a family of mutated slasher villains. One thing I like about them is the use of traps and hunting weapons. For instance, they use bow and arrows quite frequently, which is a pretty uncommon weapon in this genre. Reverend Harry Powell, the Knight of the Hunter. Harry Powell is a misogynistic and charismatic preacher. He travels around Ohio preaching his sermons, but secretly he's a killer, marrying widows only to kill them and take their money. He believes he's doing the Lord's work, which is what makes him such an interesting villain, along with his tattooed knuckles, the left hand saying hate and the right saying love. He uses these while preaching his message about how love always wins in the end. Powell marries a widow whose husband stashed away $10,000 and only his kids know where. Most of the film follows as he tries to get the money from the kids. He's a great villain for his unique motivation and the fact that he's such a smooth talker. Also, it was probably pretty edgy in the 50s to have a preacher be the villain, especially when you consider some of his dialogue with God.
Not that you mind the killings. Your book is full of killings.
Jack Frost. This could be referring to two different movies. Jack Frost, the 1998 family-friendly movie about a dad being resurrected as a snowman in order to set things right with his son, or Jack Frost, the 1997 R-rated movie about a serial killer who gets genetic material on him which fuses him with the snow so he becomes a killer snowman. Yeah, it was a bad night when you're 8 years old and you get those two mixed up at the Blockbuster. Well, obviously we're talking about the slasher film here. This is a fun one to put on around the holidays. It's completely crazy, but what else would you expect from a killer snowman movie? And of course, every kill is punctuated with some kind of snow-related pun. Ed Cooper, the Mutilator. This movie is insane just for the motivation of the killer alone. Basically, Ed Cooper is a husband and father who has an unfortunate drinking habit. While he's out drinking on his birthday, his wife bakes him a cake, and his son, Ed Jr., decides to do something nice for him by cleaning his hunting rifles. Yeah, well, you can see where this is going. Ed Jr. accidentally fires off a shot that kills his mother. At this point, it kind of just feels like a gun safety PSA. So Ed Sr. shows up to find his wife's dead body. Fast forward a few years and Ed Jr. is now a college kid and is asked by his dad to lock up his hunting lodge. So he decides to bring his college friends with him and make it a party place for the fall break. At the same time, Ed Sr. begins having murderous dreams, and in an alcoholic rage, he decides he's gonna kill his son and his friends. This is another one done on a shoestring budget, and it's worth checking out the behind the scenes as the film crew just tried to make it work with several strange choices like filling the pool with milk to make it more murky and several effects gone wrong. Killbots Chopping Mall. Chopping Mall is about high-tech mall security robots malfunctioning and going on a killing spree on a group of mall employees who stay overnight to party. There's not too much to say about the Killbots themselves. Basically, a freak lightning storm short-circuits the central security computer, which somehow messes with the robot's programming, which causes them to try to kill everyone they come in contact with. It's got all the over-the-top kills and gratuitous nudity you could ask for. It's also got some of the most strange and funny dialogue in the genre that'll just stick with you for years.
You smell like pepperoni. Wait a minute.
What?
I like pepperoni.
Smiley. Smiley is a 2012 horror film starring several big YouTube stars from the time as they're stalked and killed by Smiley, an internet myth turned real entity who has stitched his eyes shut and cut his mouth into a smile. The signature trait of Smiley is that he sends the message, "I did it for the lols," to someone 3 times and then kills them. The fact that this is the killer's main tagline mixed with these very of the time YouTube stars makes the movie kind of feel like a troll, especially now over 10 years later. But the mask itself is pretty cool. I'll give it that. Ruth Chandler, the Girl Next Door. Not to be confused with the 2004 raunchy rom-com of the same name, this movie released in 2007. It's based off of the Jack Ketchum novel of the same name and is one of the darkest films on the Iceberg, with Ruth Chandler definitely landing near the top of the most twisted villains on the list. The film follows a boy named David who develops a crush on the new girl next door, Meg. Meg and her sister Susan were taken in by their Aunt Ruth after their parents died in a car accident. Aunt Ruth is an extremely weird person. She invites the neighborhood boys over and gives them cigarettes and beer, usually while telling them details about taboo subjects like prostitution. While she treats the boys well, she neglects Meg and Susan, with Meg getting the brunt of it. This starts by Ruth calling Meg fat and not allowing her to eat for long periods of time. Eventually, she begins calling Meg a whore and physically abuses her. Worse than this, she ties Meg up in the basement and allows the neighborhood boys to freely abuse her. There is a laundry list of evil things Ruth does in this film, and a lot of it I can't even go into detail on, but it's heartbreaking and infuriating to watch, especially after the cops don't initially do anything when called to the house. What's worse about all of this is that the story is based on a real-life event. Ruth is based on a real woman who tortured and murdered a girl under her care. Apparently, the real-life story is even more horrifying, and Jack Ketchum even left some of it out of the novel because he found it too disturbing. Anyway, the movie's dedicated to Sylvia Marie Likens, the real-life girl who went through all of this. Evie, the Evil Bong. This is one of the silliest horror franchises in recent years. Evie is a sentient bong that was created by a voodoo doctor in New Orleans. She uses her powers to bring anyone who takes a fat rip to the bong world, a strange strip club-like dream world. Much like the Matrix, if you die in the bong world, you die in real life, and Evie takes your energy to make herself stronger. It's a pretty crazy movie, and there's actually been a few sequels, as well as the long-awaited crossover film Ginger Dead Man vs. Evil Bong. Dr. Geneseur, Eyes Without a Face. This is one of my favorite horror films of the 1960s. Dr. Geneseur is a renowned surgeon. After he and his daughter get into a car accident, his daughter is horribly disfigured. Following the accident, the doctor starts going insane. He kidnaps women who bear resemblance to his daughter and removes their faces, hoping to find a perfect match for his daughter. Mahogany, The Midnight Meat Train. This is one of those entries that make me glad I dived into this Iceberg, because I've never heard of this movie, but it is wild in some really cool ways. It follows a photographer, Leon, played by a not yet famous Bradley Cooper. He specializes in taking morbid photos, especially of dead bodies and accidents around the city. But in order to up his game, he decides to see the city at night. He witnesses some disturbing events, like a girl being attacked by thugs, taking photos before finally intervening. The next day, he sees that the girl has gone missing and starts to string together a series of missing people who all got on the subway and then vanished. The only connection is a butcher named Mahogany who seems to frequent the subway. It turns out that Mahogany is responsible for the murders, but this conspiracy goes far deeper. Mahogany is simply a servant to a strange race of underground creatures who feed on the corpses Mahogany brings them via the subway. This is done to keep the creatures at bay so they don't attack the surface. Yeah, I can't say I was expecting such a cosmic horror reveal here. There's more to it than that, but I'll leave it there for now. Vukmir, a Serbian film. A Serbian film is well known as one of the most disturbing films ever made, and honestly, even compared to some of the stuff I've covered in the disturbing manga Iceberg, this movie might still be the champ. I can't even try to describe some of the debauchery in this movie without the video being age restricted, so let me give you a brief overview. Milos, a former adult actor turned father, is hurting for cash and is talked into getting back into the business to make a few bucks. He's supposed to be doing an artsy film done by adult film director only known as Vukmir, but soon realizes how sick the director is when Vukmir shows him his latest film. I can't even describe it, but let's just say it reminds me of that one scene in My Chan's Daily Life. Anyway, Milos attempts to leave but is captured by Vukmir, who then injects him with a drug that causes him to be aggressive and suggestible. From there, he's forced into some truly horrific acts, and I'll leave it at that. If you want me to do a full breakdown of this one, let me know in the comments. I mean, who needs a soul, right? Coffin Baby, Toolbox Murders. Toolbox Murders is a 2004 slasher and hidden gem by horror legend Tobe Hooper, most well known for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's centered around the Loosman Arms, a former luxury hotel that was recently renovated into an apartment building. Shortly after the renovations, the new tenants begin being killed off in a brutal fashion by a mysterious killer. This villain is known as Coffin Baby. Why Coffin Baby? Well, his mother died while she was pregnant with him, and at the funeral, he clawed his way out of her womb, somehow surviving, which introduces the supernatural element of the character. Apparently, the man who built the Loosman was into the occult, and it's implied that some sort of spell is what keeps Coffin Baby alive and immortal. While he mostly covers his face with masks, Coffin Baby's true face is horrific, looking like some kind of walking corpse, as his flesh is barely held to his face by screws. Honestly, he looks pretty awesome, and major props for the makeup here. Harry Stadling, Christmas Evil. This is just a fun Santa slasher film. It follows Harry starting when he was a young boy. On Christmas Eve one year, he sneaks downstairs to see Santa Claus groping his mom. Of course, this is his father, but Harry doesn't know that, and it apparently traumatizes him. As an adult, Harry's kind of a wacko. He works at a toy factory, and in his spare time, he pretends to be Santa Claus. He constantly wears the outfit, and his apartment is decked in Christmas decorations. When his coworker lies to him and his bosses overwork him, Harry finally snaps. He believes he really is Santa Claus and goes around murdering people using items from his bag of gifts. I actually really like this movie because the actor playing Harry is pretty good, and his delusional mindset is pretty creepy. Also, I have to mention the ending to this movie, so spoilers ahead. Harry is being chased down by the townspeople and police in his van, forcing him to run off of a bridge. Before crashing to the ground, suddenly his van takes flight, and we hear the last few lines of The Night Before Christmas. That ending is wild, and it leaves you wondering if this is just another delusion, or somehow Harry did in fact gain the powers of Santa Claus. Papa Corn, Circus of the Dead. With a name like Circus of the Dead, you'd expect this to be a zombie film, but no, it's about a bunch of homicidal circus clowns coming to town. This group is led by Papa Corn. There's not much motivation to Papa Corn other than he's a nihilist and thinks everyone deserves to die. He carries a set of Loteria cards, which is kind of like a bingo card game from Mexico, and uses the cards to help him decide how to kill his victims. At the beginning of the film, the circus show features a segment of the clowns beating a tied up person. Obviously, this seems like good clown fun, and Papa Corn picks a person from the audience to give an award to. What he's really picking is his next victim. Most of the movie is him psychologically torturing this person, and by the end, the person he picked ends up being the next person who's beaten up by the clowns in the next circus show, implying that Papa Corn does this routinely as the circus travels around. Kind of a cool concept. Steve. Found. This movie follows Marty, a bully 12-year-old who discovers a dark secret. He looks inside his brother's bowling bag one day to find not a bowling ball, but a human head. Marty's older brother Steve is apparently a serial murderer and necrophiliac. Worse than this, his crimes are racially motivated as he only targets black people. We don't really know why Steve turned out this way, but he only gets worse, killing more and more people, including his own parents, who he brutally dismembers. Dr. Ripper, slashers. In the last tier we mentioned Slashers, the 2001 movie about a horror game show where contestants are locked in an arena with slasher villains. Well, Dr. Ripper is the most famous of the slashers and has tallied up the most kills on the show. Instead of just going for kills, however, he loves to humiliate and torture his victims first. The Bowling Ball Killer. This is a goofy ass movie about an after-hours bowling competition that goes bad when the bowlers are killed off by a mysterious person with a bowling ball bag for a head. The killer wears a bowling shirt and khakis and kills their victims using bowling-related equipment. I mean, what more can I say about this one? Denny Richards, Adam Chaplin. This is a lesser-known action horror film that mostly has a notoriety for being insanely gory. It follows Adam Chaplin, a man whose wife is killed by a mob boss, so he somehow calls upon a demon who gives him superhuman strength in order to get revenge. And it is an absolute bloodbath. While the film is pretty low budget, I have to give props to the practical effects here, which look pretty damn good. Denny Richards is the mob boss that kills Adam's wife, and for some reason he has a crazy look, like something out of Resident Evil, with his flesh all mutilated and a mask with an upside-down cross on it. All the while wearing a suit, which is kind of cool. Wong Chi-hong. The Untold Story. Also called the Eight Immortals Restaurant, this movie is about a restaurant owner who is secretly killing people and chopping them up. In fact, he doesn't really own the restaurant at all and killed the original owner and his family. The Stranger. The Wailing. In a small South Korean village, a bizarre infection breaks out, causing the residents to become violent and deranged, killing their families. The police investigate the events and find that there is a strange man with glowing eyes at the center of the chaos. This man is believed to be a demon and begins to target a policeman's daughter. Psychopath. Angst. Angst is an Austrian horror film following a serial killer. After 10 years of imprisonment for previous crimes, including killing his mother, he's released and is ready to kill again. He stumbles upon a random house where he tortures and kills the inhabitants, including drowning a man in a wheelchair and drinking the blood of a woman. Other than some brief flashbacks showing the killer's parents abusing him, this one is pretty straightforward. Just a psychopath doing psycho shit. Big Ronnie, the Greasy Strangler. This movie is so strange it's hard to describe. It's about a father and son who live together, Big Ronnie and Big Braden. When Braden falls in love with the girl, it sparks a rivalry between Ronnie and Braden. Meanwhile, a killer is on the loose named the Greasy Strangler. The movie makes it clear from the first scene that Big Ronnie is the Strangler, as he outright says it, and he's obsessed with grease. It's more of a comedy film than a horror, but it has some really gross out moments and kills that will make your skin crawl. Although I might argue that the kills are not the most disturbing part of this film, as it's very jarring all around the first time you watch it. Everything about the dialogue, visuals, and acting is just uncomfortable. It's hard to explain without watching it yourself, but it definitely gives off Tim and Eric vibes, and it reminds me a lot of Kuso, another comedy gross out horror that I covered in last year's Chiller Killer Countdown. While it is a cringeworthy watch, I found myself laughing out loud on several occasions, so give this one a look if you're into out there comedies.
Too much grease is bad for you. I read it in a fitness magazine someone left on the bus.
That's horseshit. You're a bullshit artist. We have an agreement. You stay here, you cook greasy. And this is not it.
Okay, let's move into the final tier. Tier 7, starting with The Circle. Unfriended Dark Web. We covered the first Unfriended a couple of tiers ago. Well, the sequel here uses the same gimmick of the entire movie taking place through computer screens. There's no connection between this movie and the first, and instead of a ghost stalking the victims, it's a secret dark web cult called The Circle. So like the first movie, a group of friends meet up through video chat. One of the friends says he got a new laptop from the Lost and Found at his work. He ends up finding a program called The River, and it links to hundreds of snuff videos of people being tortured and killed. Shortly after showing his friend unfriend some of the videos, they begin being cyberstalked and attacked in real life. The circle is so interconnected that it tracks them down and kills them. Emily, let's scare Jessica to death. I gotta say, that's one of my favorite film titles ever. The film follows Jessica, a recently released mental patient, and her husband Duncan as they move into an old farmhouse in the country, hoping the peaceful life will help Jessica recover her fragile mental state. When they get to a farmhouse, they discover a mysterious woman, Emily, has been living there. From this point forward, Jessica begins hearing voices and seeing visions related to Emily. What's great about this is that because of Jessica's previous time in a mental institution, you can't tell if these experiences are real or simply hallucinations. Turns out that Emily was originally a girl named Abigail Bishop in the 19th century who drowned on the day of her wedding. Through unknown means, she was resurrected as a sort of vampire. She has psychic powers that allows her to persuade and bend people to her will. Harry Jared, House of Wax. In the House of Wax, Harry Jared is an expert wax sculptor making extremely detailed figures for his museum. Unfortunately, Harry's business partner, Matthew Burke, is more interested in money than art and burns down the museum for insurance money with Harry inside. Harry survives the incident but is horribly disfigured. Years later, he reopens the museum with the new wax figures being even more detailed and lifelike than ever. Well, if you hadn't guessed, Harry went mad from the burning and has started to use real people in his figures. Pretty cool concept, kind of reminds me of Bucket of Blood. Horror legend Vincent Price plays Harry with yet another great performance. Honestly, this is kind of a classic and could stand to be further up on the Berg if you ask me. Lam Goryu, Dr. Lam. Dr. Lam is based on a real-life serial killer, and for the most part, the movie follows the real crimes pretty closely. Basically, Lam is a taxi driver. One night, a random drunk girl gets in his car and starts puking everywhere. Something snaps in him and he kills the girl. He hides the body under a sofa, all the while his family sits on it completely unaware. Later, he chops the body up in a scene reminiscent of Guinea Pig 2. From there, he gets a taste for it and begins killing more people before finally getting caught by the police. Masked Man, Alive. Okay, this one is a really deep cut. Alive, or #Alive, is a Korean zombie flick from 2020 that follows two survivors in an apartment building. As the two attempt to survive and travel to a safer part of the building, they encounter a man in a mask who saves them and gives them food and water. The food turns out to be drugged, causing the two to pass out. It turns out the man's wife is a zombie and he's been keeping her tied up in the back room. He's clearly gone mad and decides that his wife must eat, so he attempts to feed the two young survivors to her. Katadine, Prophecy. Prophecy is a 1979 monster movie. It follows an environmental agent who discovers the waste from a paper mill has polluted the local area with some unknown chemical to mutate the local wildlife, like some giant tadpoles, and most notably a giant bear, Katadine, that is on the loose and killing people. The movie is a little slow moving, but worth it for the mutated bear scenes because it looks really cool despite its movement being a little wonky at times. George Mistrandia, Hotel Inferno. Hotel Inferno is done by one of the directors of Adam Chaplin, Giulio De Santi. This film is just as packed full of blood and guts, but this time has an interesting gimmick as the entire film is shown through a POV perspective. It seems heavily inspired by first-person shooter video games, and even the characters and dialogue remind me of House of the Dead or something like that. It follows a hitman who is hired by George Mistrandia to kill a couple in a hotel. Well, it turns out that this is all a ruse planned by Mistrandia, and the hotel is actually a complex labyrinth filled with horrifying creatures. Mistrandia brought the hitman here to be used in an occult ritual, bringing about the apocalypse. So now we watch as the hitman fights his way out with kill after kill chock full of gore. Tarman, Return of the Living Dead. Honestly, this one could probably be up a tier or two in my book. Tarman is the most recognizable of the zombies in Return of the Living Dead. Technically, he's not covered in tar, but because this particular corpse has been sealed up for 2 decades in a chemical liquid, which decomposed most of its body, it gave it a blackened tar look. Great makeup here, and it's hard to forget the mug on this guy. Brent and Kendall Ryan, Mom and Dad. You might remember this movie popping up around the internet back in 2017. It stars Nick Cage and Selma Blair as parents who suddenly start trying to kill their kids. At first, they're pretty typical parents with their own family problems, but suddenly around the world, parents begin going insane and homicidal towards their children. It's a little vague as to how this begins, but it's heavily implied there is a strange static signal playing through devices that causes adults to reject their paternal instincts and in fact do the opposite. There's not much more detail than that. It's a fun idea for a horror film, film, and although the ending is kind of divisive, this is a good one overall. Labby, Where the Dead Go to Die. Okay, so this one leads down its own rabbit hole, but Where the Dead Go to Die is a feature-length film made by one animator and is known for being completely surreal. The creator, Jimmy Screamclaws, has made a couple of similar films that are usually considered just straight up bad, but they also have a bit of a following for being uncomfortable to watch, especially since they generally have really dark themes. Where the Dead Go to Die follows a group of children in a depressing neighborhood who are haunted by a demonic dog named Labby, and this dog does all kinds of terrible things. It's a wild experience watching this movie, and I could do a whole video diving into this guy's work. Josh Templeton, Super Dark Times. This film follows two teenage friends, Zach and Josh. While Josh's older brother is gone, they dig through his stuff with some other boys and find a katana. They go into the woods to play with it, but an altercation between Josh and one of the other boys ends with the boy being stabbed by Josh. They decide to hide the body in the woods and keep it a secret, but Josh decides to kill again and eventually kidnaps the girl that he and Zach both have a crush on. I mean, wow, what a super dark time. Fouad Ramses, Blood Feast. Blood Feast was pretty controversial at the time, considered one, if not the first, in the splatter film genre. And the villain, Fouad Ramses, is seen as the first machete-wielding madman, inspiring the likes of Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers years later. Ramses runs an exotic catering service, but on the side, he happens to be a serial killer that collects the limbs and organs of his victims. He also worships the Egyptian goddess Ishtar. When a mother comes to Ramses to cater her daughter's party, he pitches the idea of serving an Egyptian meal. Secretly, he's using this opportunity to prepare a blood feast, a stew made from his victims' body parts with the intent of resurrecting Ishtar. Nowadays, the gore is somewhat tame, but in 1963, this was shocking and revolting, making the director Herschel Gordon Lewis an absolute legend and the godfather of splatter. Well, there you have it. That is a lot of villains. I'm sure there are some villains that could have or should have been on the list, so let me know what I'm missing in the comments. Shout out to my patrons, Naomi Romero, Soma, Krusty the Crab, One Group, Laz Wishgender, Hunter Piva, Heather M, Creepypasta Cube, A Slightly Bigger Ant, Ricky Shadow, Strong Kohi, Matt Rozak, Steamboat Millie, The Beast Llama, Holy Ears, Nat 007, Andrew Valencia, Ursa, and Michelle Bracey. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you want a shout out like that at the end of every video, as well as bonus content, consider becoming a patron. The link is below. But I appreciate you guys watching at all, so thank you. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.